Chapter 497. Sect. Sect Master, Senior Brother Luo he. An inner disciple knelt down in fear and stammered. Then, two pale-faced disciples carried a corpse covered by a long robe into the hall and gently put it down. Disciple. Venerable Zong Tian was stunned. His whole body was trembling, and a terrifying aura spread out from his body. His eyes turned blood-red. This was his disciple, his only disciple. His son had died under Shao Qianfeng's sword, and this disciple was the only one left. He loved this disciple very much and tried his best to train him to be the next sect master of the Sky Burial Sword sect. He even taught him his unique secret technique, the Sky Burial Secret Sword, so that he could have a trump card to save his life if he encountered a strong enemy. However, he didn't expect that his only disciple, whom he valued, would die. Who is it? Venerable Zong Tian roared as if he had gone mad. In the hall, it was as if thunder was surging. The elders and disciples were all pale, and their eyes were filled with fear. Especially the disciples, who vomited blood and fell to the ground under such a terrifying aura. Sect Master. The great elder's face changed when he saw this. He quickly roared in a thunderous voice. Venerable Zong Tian woke up with a start. He quickly restrained his violent aura as soon as he saw the scene in the main hall. Otherwise, the disciples in the main hall would be crippled if this continued. The Zong Tian sword sect would suffer unnecessary losses. Sect Master, I'm sorry for your loss, the elder advised. Sect Master, the dead can't be brought back to life. The most important thing now is to find out who did it, the great elder said angrily. Great elder is right. Investigate, we must investigate. We must find out who did this. Once we find out who the murderer is, we must skin him alive and torture him for 7 days and 7 nights. The elders gnashed their teeth in hatred. According to the observation of the wounds, there should be 2 murderers. An elder who had carefully examined the corpse said, "These 2 people's swordsmanship attainments are very high. They are not inferior to us. In fact, they are even superior to us." The great elder was shocked. He also carefully examined the wounds. The more he looked, the more surprised he was. This was because he found that the wounds on the corpse were indeed from 2 different people. One of them was comparable to him in swordsmanship, while the other was terrifying. Could it be 2 sword venerables? The first elder had this thought in his mind, but he immediately rejected it. The honorable swordsman assassinated some Qi high swordsman? This was simply a fantasy. Swordsmen had their pride. Powerful swordsmen were like living beings who were superior to them. Unless they had no other choice, they would not attack swordsmen who were much weaker than them, let alone assassinate them. Even some of the more despicable and shameless revered swordsmen would not use this method. To them, no matter how many Qi high realm swordsmen there were, they were just a bunch of ants. One sword strike was enough to kill hundreds or thousands of them. If it's not the sword venerable, could it be one of the top 10 swordsmen on the heavenly sword ranking? The elders thought of another possibility. On the heavenly sword hero roll, there are not many who are on par with me in terms of swordsmanship. Only Zhu Wudao and Yan Zhiyo can frighten me. But given their status, they don't need to assassinate us to deal with the heaven-burying sword sect. The first elder analyzed. Moreover, the disciples who were killed were undamaged by the sword tower. We did not hear any movements last night. There is only one possibility. The assassin has a rare secret treasure that can break the seal. 8th Elder, please make a trip to the Tongtian mountain. Reverend Zong Tian was terrifyingly calm, but in fact, he was furious. He had already found out that his disciple's spatial bracelet was missing. In other words, it was taken by the assassin. Among them, there was a high possibility that his disciple's secret technique, the heaven-burying secret sword, was in possession. The heaven-burying secret sword was an offensive secret technique that he obtained through a fortuitous encounter. Other than obtaining the heaven-burying secret sword, his strength also increased to the level of a normal honorable swordsman. Once he used the heaven-burying secret sword, he could kill a strong honorable swordsman. It could be said that the heaven-burying secret sword was his trump card. It was his strongest trump card. In the entire heaven-burying sword sect, he was the only one who practiced this secret technique. This time, in order to train the next sect leader, he gave a copy of this secret technique to his only disciple, hoping that he could comprehend and practice it. Who would have thought that he would be working for someone else? The heaven-burying secret sword is not that easy to practice. When I first obtained it, it took me 5 years to comprehend the surface, and 10 years to cultivate it to a small success. Until now I have not cultivated it to the level of Deshang. Reverend Zhang Tian's eyes were extremely gloomy as he said to himself. Yes, sect leader. After the 8th elder gave a slight bow, he quickly left for the Tongtian mountain. Chu Mu, Xiao Qianfeng, and Xia Yu all arrived at the Tongtian mountain. Their primary goal was to check the Heavenly Sword hero list. The first place was no longer Zhong Qingtian, but Yan Jiu. The second place was Zhong Qingtian, the third was Zhu Wudao, the fourth was still Gu Jianghe, the fifth was Chu Mu, the sixth was Han Bingyu, the seventh was Shi Fenglai, and the eighth was Mo Duoba. The rankings were the same as before. However, the changes in the rankings of the Heavenly Sword hero list indicated that there would be fierce competition for the rankings in the next few days. Xiao Qianfeng found his name at the 13th place, and a fierce look flashed across his eyes. At this moment, the 30th level of the Heavenly Sword Tower lit up, indicating that someone was challenging the Heavenly Sword Tower and had reached the 30th level. The 30th level. Chu Mu, Xiao Qianfeng, and Xia Yu were all shocked. On the Heavenly Sword hero list, Chu Mu was not confident that he could reach the 30th level. That meant that there were only 3 people, Zhong Qingtian, Zhu Wudao, and Yan Jiu. The swordsman challenging the Heavenly Sword Tower was very likely to be one of the 3. But who was it? Besides Zhong Qingtian, Chu Mu had never seen Zhu Wudao and Yan Jiu. It should be Zhu Wudao, Chu Mu said to himself. It's the 30th level. I wonder if Zhu Wudao can reach the 31st level this time, surpass Yan Jiu and Zhong Qingtian, and regain the first place. A swordsman beside him muttered, his tone full of anticipation. It's Zhu Wudao indeed. Xia Yu's voice was filled with joy. They were all waiting quietly, waiting for Zhu Wudao's final result. Would he regain the first place? Or would he sink into oblivion? Time passed slowly. Even if Zhu Wudao was strong, it would not be easy for him to pass the 30th level. After an hour, the 30th level finally dimmed. The swordsmen at the top of the Heavenly Sword Mountain all widened their eyes and held their breaths. They all looked at the 31st level, and in that instant, it was as if their hearts had stopped beating. The weight of a breath felt as long as a decade. The 31st level of the Heavenly Sword Tower suddenly lit up, filling everyone's eyes and calming their uneasy hearts. It was like a desperate person floating in the endless dark sea suddenly seeing the light of a lighthouse in the distance. The 31st level lit up, indicating that Zhu Wudao had passed the 30th level and entered the 31st level. Great, Senior Brother Wudao has finally broken through the shackles of half a year ago and entered the 31st level. A disciple of the Royal Sword Sect was overjoyed. Zhu Wudao was a member of the Royal Sword Sect. When he became famous, the people of the Royal Sword Sect would also benefit from it. Zhu Wudao. Chu Mu's eyes blazed. Not only him, but Xiao Qianfeng's eyes also blazed. Xia Yu clenched his fists, extremely excited. To those swordsmen who were full of confidence in themselves, the stronger others were, the more their fighting spirit would be aroused. But to those swordsmen who understood their own potential and strength, the strength of others would either make them jealous or extremely respectful. Every breath of time seemed to be magnified 100 times, 1,000 times, but everyone forgot about time. Finally, the light of the 31st level of the Heavenly Sword Tower dimmed, like an extinguished candle. Following that, a black shadow flew out from the heavenly sword tower and landed safely. A strong, absolute, and lawless aura spread out, crushing everything. Everyone's heart trembled and they couldn't breathe. The heavenly sword mountain was eerily silent, as if all sounds had been sealed. In less than 3 breaths of time, this powerful and lawless aura disappeared without a trace, as if it had never appeared. Some of the weaker swordsmen lost all their strength, and their bodies went limp. Some of the stronger swordsmen were pale and could barely hold on. Only those swordsmen who were ranked on the heavenly sword ranking could hold on. As for the few swordsmen who had reached the origin realm, their faces were extremely solemn. Is this the aura of the heavenless sword Tao? Chumu couldn't help but think. Chumu also yearned for the inheritance of the sword Tao, but he didn't have the opportunity to do so before. After receiving the guidance of the Azura sword of Gojoseon, Chumu had an idea. It was an idea that would shock countless swordsmen in the central sword domain, to create his own sword Tao. His path was destined to be different from others. It was a path that belonged only to him. Then, his sword Tao would naturally be different from others. He had to create it himself. According to the words of the Azura sword of Gojoseon, there were 2 prerequisites to creating a sword Tao. First, one couldn't inherit any sword Tao. Otherwise, it would be branded with the shadow of a sword Tao, and creating one's own sword Tao would be 100 times more difficult. Second, one had to obtain the origin sword seed. The origin sword seed was also the seed of the sword Tao. With the origin sword seed, it was equivalent to having a carrier. For those swordsmen who inherited the sword Tao, they naturally obtained the origin sword seed. For example, Xiao Qianfeng's lifeless sword Tao was the lifeless sword seed. The origin sword seed was the most primitive origin sword seed. It didn't carry any sword Tao, and was usually used as a sword Tao inheritance. However, it had an even greater use that was forgotten by many, to carry one's own sword Tao. Without the origin sword seed, even if one's own sword Tao was created, it would disappear due to the lack of a carrier. Creating one's own sword Tao was destined to be an extremely difficult path. The probability of failure was very high, and it might even end without any result. However, Chumu didn't regret it. Ever since this idea appeared in his mind, it became stronger and stronger, and had already taken root in his soul. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 498. His long silver hair fell to his shoulders, and his eyes were long and narrow like blades. The corners of his eyes were cold and sharp, and any swordsman who met his gaze felt as if their bodies were being torn apart. Celestial Sword Hero Zhu Wudao. Before Zhong Qingtian appeared, only Yan Zhiyo could compete with him among the strongest sword heroes in the entire central main sword region. He stood at the top of Tongtian Mountain, as if he was the center of the mountain. Everyone's eyes fell on him. Following that, the heavenly sword hero ranking changed. Zhu Wudao, who was ranked 3rd, suddenly jumped to 1st place. Yan Zhiyo dropped to 2nd place, and Zhong Qingtian dropped to 3rd place. They had all reached the 31st floor. As for Gu Jianghe, he had always been at the 29th floor. He didn't seem to have come to challenge the heavenly sword tower. Of course, he might have challenged it, but he didn't pass the 29th floor. I'm going to challenge the sword tower. Xiao Qianfeng's figure flashed, and he rushed into the heavenly sword tower before anyone else. The last time he challenged the sword tower was more than 3 months ago. Now that he had reorganized his strength, he would definitely be able to get a better ranking against those fixed virtual swordsmen. Zhu Wudao didn't say a word and left the top of Tongtian Mountain, leaving behind a shocking back view. Xiao Qianfeng. In the crowd, an elder muttered with a gloomy face. After a long time, Xiao Qianfeng also flew out of the heavenly sword tower. He had been defeated and killed on the 27th floor. Not long after, the ranking on the heavenly sword hero ranking changed again. Xiao Qianfeng rose from 13th to 10th. It's my turn, Chumu said. He used the flying swan illusory steps and entered the heavenly sword tower in the blink of an eye. A swordsman who was approaching the heavenly sword tower fell a step behind and was about to curse. Xiao Qianfeng's cold gaze fell on him, causing him to involuntarily shiver. That's the Zhen Tian sword hero Chu Mu. 5th on the heavenly sword hero ranking. He's here to challenge the heavenly sword tower again. I don't think it's that useful. It's only been a few days since he last challenged the heavenly sword tower. How much could his strength have improved? The most important thing for challenging the heavenly sword tower was one's combat talent, and then the combat experience derived from combat talent. This was because the combat talent and combat experience of the virtual swordsman in the heavenly sword tower were fixed and would not change at all. Therefore, the more battle experience a swordsman had, the more they knew how to fight, and naturally, they could achieve better results. However, in just a few days, they did not think that Chu Mu's combat talent could improve by much. After Chu Mu entered the first floor, he entered the second floor in less than 3 breaths of time. Chop iron. Chu Mu directly used a sword master's ultimate sword technique to kill one of the virtual swordsmen. However, Chu Mu did not kill the second virtual swordsman. Instead, he blocked his attack. 10 breaths later, the illusory swordsman attacked more than 100 times. Unfortunately, it didn't use any killing sword skills similar to chop iron. Chu Mu finished off the illusory swordsman with one sword and entered the third floor. Xiao Qianfeng stared at the heavenly sword tower and suddenly felt a chill down his spine. He was locked on by a fierce, murderous intent, and his body almost stiffened. He quickly turned his head and saw a pair of gloomy eyes filled with murderous intent. It was the buried heaven sword sect's 8th elder. However, Xiao Qianfeng smiled coldly and looked away as if he did not care. He looked at the heavenly sword tower. The top of the heavenly sword mountain was a very special place. Swordsmen from all over the world gathered here. Some were strong, some were weak, some had no one to rely on, and some had amazing forces. In short, the top of the heavenly sword mountain could be said to be a very mixed place, but it was not chaotic at all. There was a written rule here that the strong could not bully the weak. It sounded ridiculous, but there was once an incident where the descendant of a powerful elder from one of the top 10 sword sects was killed here by a swordsman who was 1 level higher than him. It even affected many innocent people, which angered the elder and the elders of the innocent people. They directly uprooted the murderer and the power behind him. After that, the top 10 sword sects jointly issued a rule that no fighting was allowed on the top of the heavenly sword mountain. Otherwise, they would kill without mercy. However, this rule was not practical. After all, how could there be a lack of fighting in the world of swordsmen? The rule was changed. A swordsman of a higher level could not attack a swordsman of a lower level. Even if a swordsman of a lower level provoked them, it was not allowed unless the swordsman of a lower level attacked first. However, there were no swordsmen of a lower level who took the initiative to provoke a swordsman of a higher level. After all, the rule only applied to the top of the heavenly sword mountain. Once they left the range of the top of the heavenly sword mountain and were not restricted by the rule, the consequences could be imagined. Swordsmen of the same level were not restricted by this rule. Of course, the prerequisite was that you had to be able to withstand the anger of the swordsman present. After all, fighting here was very likely to affect others. If you did not have enough deterrence, you would undoubtedly be increasing your own hatred. Therefore, even though the buried heaven sword sect's 8th elder wanted nothing more than to immediately capture Xiao Qianfeng, he had to forcefully suppress this thought. He did not want to be killed for violating the rule. Although he was an insignificant ant to the 10 great sword sects, the 10 great sword sects would still take action to protect the rule they had set. Xiao Qianfeng, I will wait here until you leave the top of the heavenly sword mountain forever, the buried heaven sword sect's 8th elder threatened. Xiao Qianfeng ignored him as if he did not hear him, causing his expression to turn even uglier. Soon, the 10th level of the Heavenly Sword Tower also lit up, indicating that Chu Mu had reached the 10th level. This speed was not only faster than the previous time, but it was also shockingly fast. From the 2nd level to the 5th level, Chu Mu had used chop iron or point kill once on every level. In the end, the virtual swordsman indeed did not use similar ultimate sword technique. While disappointed, Chu Mu had other ideas in his mind. That was to use chop iron and point kill more of the 2 ultimate sword techniques, as well as the inverted space steps, which he had only scratched the surface of. Although it consumed a lot of energy, as long as he passed the level, he would be able to return to his peak state. Such opportunities were rare. As the saying went, practice makes perfect. By using it more often, he could better find his shortcomings and improve them. After passing the 10th level, Chu Mu had some understanding. The consumption of chop iron and point kill decreased slightly, and the inverted space steps also improved slightly. The level of the inverted space steps was higher than the 3rd level of the Flying Swan illusory sky steps, and the domain involved was more profound. To be able to scratch the surface of it was truly beyond Chu Mu's expectations. The slightest improvement of the inverted space steps would undoubtedly require a lot of effort to deduce. Now that it could be improved slightly, it was a joyous occasion. He entered the 11th level. Chop iron, point kill, inverted space steps. Chu Mu instantly disappeared and appeared behind a virtual swordsman, killing him in one strike. The inverted space steps had already surpassed common sense and involved the incomparably profound domain of space. The 12th level, the 13th level, the 14th level, the swordsmen outside the Heavenly Sword Tower were all shocked. A few days ago, a swordsman who had personally witnessed Chu Mu's challenge rubbed his eyes hard, thinking that he was hallucinating. Why is he so fast? What's going on? The swordsman didn't understand. Chu Mu's speed in the tower was too fast. Compared to Zhu Wudao, he wasn't inferior at all. In fact, a few swordsmen with sharper senses discovered that Chu Mu's speed in the tower was slightly faster than Zhu Wudao's. Xiao Qianfeng stared at the tower that dimmed and lit up level by level, his eyes glowing. Chu Mu was his junior brother. With such an achievement, not only was he not jealous, he was actually happy. Of course, his fighting spirit was even stronger. Very quickly, Chu Mu passed the 20th level and entered the 21st level. Boss Chu is so strong. Xia Yu's mouth was wide open in shock. On the 21st level, there were 21 powerful virtual swordsmen. When they joined forces, they were extremely powerful. Last time, Chu Mu had taken a long time to find the best opportunity to kill them. However, this time, it didn't take long for Chu Mu to find the best opportunity and insta-kill him. Next, it was time for him to perform. Chop iron, reverse air step kill. Soon, all 21 powerful virtual swordsmen were dead. For Chu Mu, he had already challenged these virtual swordsmen. Even if he changed his moves again, it was very limited and not difficult. It was as if the same move would be ineffective the second time. Very quickly, Chu Mu reached the 29th level again. Last time, he had reached the 29th level and was killed after killing 3 virtual swordsmen. This time, Chu Mu wanted to get a better result. If possible, it would be best if he could pass the 29th level and enter the 30th level. At this point, the difficulty of each level increased by several times. Another top-grade sword appeared in Chu Mu's left hand. Deshang's dual sword technique. After many years of practicing the dual sword technique, Deshang could use different sword moves and sword skills with greater power. With 2 swords in hand, Chu Mu's aura suddenly changed. He used the Flying Swan illusory steps and quickly dodged, looking for the best opportunity to attack. With 2 swords, Chu Mu's blocking ability was stronger, and his survivability was increased by several times. Dodge block. Seizing the opportunity, he used the reverse air step. With one step, he suddenly appeared behind a virtual swordsman. Chop iron, kill, 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 kill. The 29th floor's virtual swordsman gave Chu Mu an enormous amount of pressure. Chu Mu's fight was very difficult. Because he was using the ultimate kill sword technique and reverse air step, his Sky Desolation sword aura was quickly being consumed. With a slash, Chu Mu's back was cut open. Blood spurted out. He also quickly counterattacked with his sword. In the end, Chu Mu killed 29 virtual swordsmen at the price of being injured 3 times. He successfully passed the 29th level and entered the 30th level. The 3 wounds were all avoided by Chu Mu. It's lit up. The 30th level is lit up. He's reached the 30th level. How can it be? It's only been a few days. The 30th level had just lit up. In less than 10 breaths of time, a figure flew out and landed safely. In a short while, Chu Mu's ranking on the Heavenly Sword ranking changed. He pushed Gu Jianghe down and took 4th place. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 499. Big Brother Chu, you're too powerful. Xia Yu exclaimed. You actually made it to 4th place. Even Gu Jianghe fell behind. The 8th elder of the Heaven-Burying Sword sect was also looking at Chu Mu with an uncertain expression. He was sure that he had never seen Chu Mu before. When he heard the discussion around him, he suddenly shivered. He knew that Chu Mu came from the Eastern Sword region. The 8th elder's impression of the Eastern Sword region was that it was a very barren place. The overall level of the swordsman was very low. He also knew that Shao Qianfeng came from the Eastern Sword region. He originally thought that Shao Qianfeng should be the most outstanding young swordsman in the Eastern Sword region, the king of sword heroes. He didn't expect that there would be someone stronger than him. Zhen Tian's sword hero, Chu Mu. The 8th elder pondered. His gaze swept over Chu Mu, then looked at Shao Qianfeng. His whole body trembled. This Chu Mu and Shao Qianfeng know each other. From the way they talk, they seem to be quite familiar with each other. Could it be that the assassins during the Dark Night were the 2 of them? Soon after, the 8th elder rejected this idea. He felt that it was impossible, but the seed of this idea had already been planted in his heart. Xia Yu, do you want to challenge him? Chu Mu asked. No, Big Brother Chu. I'll challenge him after my strength increases a bit. Xia Yu said. Senior brother, let's go back. Chu Mu said. Shao Qianfeng nodded. Suddenly, he transmitted his voice to Chu Mu. He's the 8th elder of the Heaven-Burying Sword sect. He's at the early stage of the Origin Realm. Once we leave the Heaven-Piercing Peak, he'll immediately chase after us and attack me. I'll leave first and lure him away. Junior brother, you and Xia Yu can leave after that. Early stage of the Origin Realm. Chu Mu didn't feel much. After all, he had already killed 2 Origin Realm swordsmen. Senior brother, how confident are you? I'm not confident, Shao Qianfeng said after a moment of silence. In that case, let me lure him away, Chu Mu said. He had the meteor sword energy and the protection of the Azura sword of Gojoseon. A mere Origin Realm sword artist was nothing in his eyes. The lifeless sword Dao I inherited has a forbidden art. Once I use it, I'll definitely be able to kill my opponent. However, I'll be weakened for a period of time. At that time, I'll need junior brother to protect me. Shao Qianfeng was silent for 3 breaths before he sent a voice transmission. Senior brother Shao. Just as Chu Mu was about to persuade Shao Qianfeng, the Azura sword of Gojoseon's voice rang in his ears. The Azura sword of Gojoseon wanted Shao Qianfeng to give it a try. With the Azura sword of Gojoseon around, Shao Qianfeng's life wouldn't be in danger. Junior brother, there's no need to say any more. We can't stay at the top of Skirich Mountain forever. Shao Qianfeng's tone was extremely resolute and unshakable. Xiaoyu, you stay here for now. Chu Mu nodded to Xiao Qianfeng and then said to Xiaoyu, Boss Chu, Boss Xiao. Xiaoyu was anxious, but when he saw the resolute expressions of Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng, he didn't say anything else and just nodded. However, only he knew what he was thinking. Let's go. Xiao Qianfeng let out a low shout. Sword chi surged as his figure flashed and turned into a stream of light, rapidly flying away from the top of Skirich Mountain. A pair of sword chi wings appeared on his back, allowing him to travel 1,000 meters in the blink of an eye. It was obvious that he had used some kind of secret technique to increase his speed. Chu Mu didn't fall behind either. He was almost neck to neck with Xiao Qianfeng as they quickly flew away. The buried heaven sword Sect's 8th elder was startled. Then, his expression changed drastically. With a hint of ruthlessness in his eyes, his sword energy surged as he turned into a stream of light and chased after them. Xiaoyu's face was filled with anxiety. He paced back and forth a few times before he immediately used a secret flying technique and chased after them. Some of the swordsmen on the top of Skirich Mountain reacted. They all realized that there was a good show to watch. 2 sword masters ranked in the top 10 of the Heavenly Sword Hero ranking and an Origin Realm swordsman. It seemed like there was a grudge between them. Let's go. Quick, follow them. There's a good show to watch. I wonder if Sword Master Jintian and Lifeless Sword Master can escape from that Origin Realm swordsman. I recognize that Origin Realm swordsman. He's the buried heaven sword Sect's 8th elder. He's at the Origin Realm. Accompanied by various discussions, whooshing sounds of breaking wind quickly followed. One figure after another flew out, transforming into streaks of lightning as they quickly chased in the direction Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng left in. Chu Mu used the sky-traversing secret technique's second stage, soaring into the heavens. With his sword chi that had just reached the peak of the chi high realm, the consumption of soaring into the heavens was nothing. What Xiao Qianfeng used was a flying secret technique that was similar to soaring into the heavens, so it didn't seem to consume much energy. Their speed was extremely fast, but the buried heaven sword Sect's 8th elder wasn't slow either. He quickly caught up and closed the distance between them. Junior brother, I'm going to use the lifeless forbidden art. Xiao Qianfeng shouted. His body suddenly stopped in midair. A strong and sharp aura surged from his body and shot into the clouds. Chu Mu also stopped and turned around to face the 8th elder, who was chasing after them. His eyes narrowed slightly. Let's kill them together. A sinister smile appeared on the 8th elder's face. Within 1,000 meters, a huge sword pressure rolled over, toppling the mountains and overturning the seas. The air produced a tsunami-like whistling sound, as if it was going to swallow Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng. The rumbling sound was like 10,000 horses galloping. The momentum was terrifying. With a boom, Xiao Qianfeng's body exploded, and an even more terrifying aura burst out. This aura was very strange. The moment it appeared, it quickly changed and brought with it traces of death chi. After a breath, the death chi became denser. The 8th elder's tsunami-like sword pressure was blocked in an instant. The 8th elder's face revealed a look of surprise. This kid must die. The 8th elder's face became sinister. There was a trace of shock in his eyes because the aura that Xiao Qianfeng released made him feel a trace of fear. It was as if death was approaching. Chu Mu glanced at Xiao Qianfeng and found that his lifeless forbidden art wasn't ready yet. However, the buried heaven sword Sect's 8th elder was already within 500 meters. In less than 2 breaths of time, he would appear in front of them. The demon-slaying sword was unsheathed, and a 10-meter-long dark golden crescent moon slashed through the air. The 8th elder only felt that the sky in front of him seemed to have lost its light in an instant, becoming dark and gloomy. Then, a dark golden waning moon seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. It suddenly appeared and tore the darkness apart. With an unparalleled sharpness, it descended in an overbearing manner and filled his eyes. You dare to show off an unfinished sword technique in front of me? Break. The eighth elder's body suddenly stopped. His hair and beard were fluttering in anger. It was as if he was in the middle of a storm. His sword pressure was raised to the extreme. The moment he unsheathed his sword, it was as if he could cut the heavens and the earth in half. A huge condensed cyan sword light slashed out and collided with the dark golden crescent moon. With a loud boom, the dark golden crescent moon was shattered by the cyan sword light. The cyan sword light paused for a moment, then continued to slash towards Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng. The cyan sword light locked onto Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng. The terrifying aura made it difficult for Chu Mu to breathe. The Origin Realm swordsmen from the Central Main Sword region were much stronger than the Origin Realm swordsmen from the Eastern Main Sword region. Chu Mu knew very well that with his strength, he wouldn't be able to withstand this cyan sword light. In an instant, he and Xiao Qianfeng would be killed. However, Chu Mu didn't have the slightest fear. He knew that the Azura sword of Gojoseon wouldn't let him be killed. Moreover, Xiao Qianfeng's lifeless forbidden art was already prepared. A thick aura of death gathered on Xiao Qianfeng's body. It was as if Xiao Qianfeng had changed into a different person. Lifeless forbidden art. Death without life. A hoarse voice sounded from the side. It was filled with deathly stillness. It made Chu Mu's hair stand on end. At this moment, Xiao Qianfeng seemed to be possessed by the god of death. With a swing of his sword, Chu Mu only saw a grayish-white sword light break through the air. Then, the cyan sword light dissipated as if it was being eroded. The eighth elder of the heaven-burying sword sect was terrified. He hurriedly waved his sword in front of him to block. However, Xiao Qianfeng's attack was simply unstoppable. There was no way to block it. With a boom, the eighth elder's sword was shattered. The grayish-white sword light slashed through the eighth elder's body without any hindrance, splitting it into two. Then, the two halves of the eighth elder's body rapidly shriveled up, as if their vitality was draining away in the blink of an eye. At the same time, the aura on Xiao Qianfeng's body disappeared. His eyes closed as he lost consciousness and fell down. Chu Mu hurriedly caught Xiao Qianfeng's body. When he felt that Xiao Qianfeng's aura was faintly discernible, he hurriedly left. He didn't even pay attention to the eighth elder's spatial bracelet. Senior Sword of Gojoseon, what should we do now? Chu Mu asked somewhat anxiously. He only used the lifeless forbidden art and consumed 10 years of his lifespan. He'll be fine after resting for a while. The Azura Sword of Gojoseon's voice sounded. It was extremely calm, causing Chu Mu to be stunned. Consuming 10 years of his lifespan and still being fine? Chu Mu couldn't understand. The Central Main Sword domain also has elixirs that can replenish lifespan. Although they are precious, as long as your strength increases, you'll be able to obtain them. The Azura Sword of Gojoseon added, moreover, your senior brother Xiao is a genius. When I return to the Azura Sword sect, I'll take him as my disciple. The Azura Sword sect has some elixirs that can replenish lifespan. Chu Mu suddenly understood. No wonder the Azura Sword of Gojoseon was so calm. The reason was this. Senior Sword of Gojoseon wants to take senior brother Xiao as his disciple. This is naturally senior brother Xiao's fortune. Chu Mu smiled and said, I'll head to the Azura Sword sect as soon as possible. There's no rush. The Azura Sword sect is on the other side of the Central Main Sword domain. With your current strength, it's almost impossible for you to go there. Wait until you have the strength of a sword sovereign before you go. The Azura Sword of Gojoseon said. Chu Mu transmitted his voice to the Azura Sword of Gojoseon as he quickly left with Xiao Qianfeng. The death of the eighth elder of the heaven-burying sword sect was witnessed by many swordsmen. The heaven-burying sword sect would soon know about it. At that time, they would also know that Xiao Qianfeng and Chu Mu were the murderers. At that time, the entire heaven-burying sword sect would definitely move out. It wouldn't take long. Therefore, returning to Tongtian Town wasn't a wise choice. It was best to stay far away and find a secluded place for Xiao Qianfeng to have a good rest. The best way was to get through this period of weakness. A group of swordsmen quickly rushed down to snatch the Eighth Elder's space bracelet. After all, it was an Origin Realm swordsman's space bracelet, so it shouldn't be ordinary. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 500. Xiao Qianfeng. Chu Mu. Damn it all. The sect master of the Heaven-Burying Sword sect, Heaven-Burying Sword Venerable, was furious. The veins on his forehead bulged, making him look like a terrifying devil. First, his son was killed by Xiao Qianfeng. Then, a large number of his disciples were killed. His only disciple was assassinated, and the murderer was still not found. Now, the Eighth Elder was killed by Xiao Qianfeng. A dignified primary realm swordsman was killed by a sword hero. The Heaven-Burying Sword sect was just a new sect. They only had 10 primary realm swordsmen, and each of them was very precious. With the death of the Eighth Elder, the Heaven-Burying Sword sect only had 9 primary realm swordsmen left. The Eighth Elder's death caused the Heaven-Burying Sword sect's strength to drop significantly. More importantly, the sect's reputation plummeted. Issue the Heaven-Burying Order to hunt down Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng. Venerable Zhang Tian's anger reached its peak, but he calmed down. However, his expression was even more frightening. The so-called Heaven-Burying Order was actually a kind of wanted order. Almost every sect had something similar. Once such an order was issued, it meant that a certain target would be hunted down endlessly. The person who provides the exact location of the two will receive 10,000 upper-grade spiritual stones. The person who brings their heads will receive 50,000 upper-grade spiritual stones. The person who captures them alive will receive 100,000 upper-grade spiritual stones. Venerable Zhang Tian continued, if it's our sect's disciples, they will also receive an Earth Realm Ancient Sword Art or even a Heaven Realm Ancient Sword Art. The elder beside him was shocked. The reward offered by Venerable Zhang Tian was extremely shocking. Even primary realm swordsmen would be tempted. Alright, I'm sure that once the news spreads out, there will definitely be many people looking for Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng. Perhaps even the primary realm swordsmen will make a move. When that time comes, they will have nowhere to go, said the Ninth Elder. The Eighth Elder's strength was similar to his, so the two of them had the best relationship. As expected, after the bounty of the Heaven-Burying Sword sect was spread, the swordsmen of Tongtian Town went crazy. The more the news spread, the more people knew about it and the more people were tempted. Not to mention 50,000 or 100,000 high-grade spirit stones, just providing accurate information could earn him 10,000 high-grade spirit stones. That was a huge gain. For many of the Qi High Realm swordsmen, they did not know how long it would take them to earn 10,000 upper-grade spirit stones. Even among the sword masters on the Heavenly Sword Master ranking, only the top 10 swordsmen would be able to afford it. Back then, Raging Wave Sword hero Qing Tianlan felt the pinch even when he took out 10,000 upper-grade spirit stones. Although he could take out 100,000 upper-grade spirit stones, it was as if he was bleeding. Although he did not take it out in the end, Chu Mu did not get it either. Primary realm swordsmen used upper-grade spirit stones for their cultivation. Therefore, a large number of Qi High Realm swordsmen were mobilized. Some of the Qi Transformation Realm swordsmen were also mobilized. They wanted to try their luck. If they were lucky, they might find out where Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng were hiding. Then they would be rich. Even a small number of primary realm swordsmen were mobilized. Among them, there were some special swordsmen. They were 9th Transformation Realm swordsmen who could not break through to the primary realm on their own for some reason. Zhao Ming was a special swordsman. He was in the 7th transformation of the 9th Transformation Realm, but he could not continue to break through. Originally, he had the opportunity to break through to the origin realm. However, a few years ago, his family had provoked a powerful enemy that no one could defeat. For the sake of his family's survival, all he had to do was to come out of seclusion and kill those powerful enemies. In the end, his family was saved. However, Zhao Ming had to pay a heavy price for forcefully using his sword aura. From then on, his cultivation was fixed and could not improve. He had no fate with the primary realm. The 9th transformation realm was a very special realm for swordsmen. The existence of this realm was to strengthen the body. This kind of strengthening was not a simple strengthening. Otherwise, some swordsmen who had been focusing on body tempering since they were young would have skipped this realm. The 9th transformation realm strengthened the body of a swordsman by using his own sword aura to temper the body. Tempering every part of the body, even the smallest part, was equivalent to completing a transformation. At this point, the strength of the body would be doubled. The amount of sword aura would not increase, but the purity would be doubled. After a round of refinement, one must have enough time to rest and recover from all kinds of exhaustion before starting the next round of refinement. This recovery time was related to one's accumulation. The more accumulation one had, the shorter the refinement time and the shorter the recovery time. This would make it easier for one to reach the origin realm from the 9th transformation realm. Every tempering not only increased the strength of the body and the purity of the sword aura, but also increased the compatibility between the sword aura and the body. The most important reason for increasing the strength of the body was to accommodate the sword energy that was many times stronger than the sword aura. Of course, some swordsmen's body could accommodate the sword energy when they were in the Qi High realm, but they could not convert the sword aura. The reason was that the compatibility between the body and the sword aura was far from enough. Every time a 9th transformation realm swordsman completed a tempering, their strength would increase significantly. However, they could not use the sword aura, because the sword aura had to be kept in the body and could not leak out. Once it leaked out, the path to the 9th transformation realm would be cut off and they could only stop there, unable to move forward. Although under normal circumstances, a 9th transformation realm swordsman's body was stronger than a Qi High realm swordsman, if they did not use the sword aura, they would not be a match for a Qi High realm swordsman. Once their life was in danger, other than being killed, they would be forced to use the sword aura and destroy their future. Therefore, once a swordsman broke through to the 9th transformation realm, they would find a secret place to cultivate. The fewer people who knew, the better. If I can find Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng and sell the information to the Buried Heaven Sword sect, I will be able to get 10,000 upper-rank soul stones. Adding the 60,000 I saved up before, I will have 70,000 upper-rank soul stones, which is just enough for me to buy a 7-transformation barrier-breaking pill. Zhao Ming thought to himself as he searched the forest. Humans were an intelligent race, so they naturally had to overcome difficulties. Faced with the possible drawbacks of the 9th transformation realm, someone had researched the barrier-breaking pill, which corresponded to the 9 stages of the 9th transformation realm. It was divided into 1st transformation to 9th transformation barrier-breaking pills. If you stopped at the 1st transformation, you could use the 1st transformation barrier-breaking pill to break through to the 2nd transformation. From then on, if you wanted to continue to improve, you would have to rely on the 2nd transformation, 3rd transformation, 4th transformation, and so on. Zhao Ming, who stopped at the 7th transformation, had to use the 7th transformation barrier-breaking pill. After that, he would have to use the 8th transformation barrier-breaking pill and the 9th transformation barrier-breaking pill to break through to the origin realm. However, the price of the barrier-breaking pill was not cheap. The 1st transformation barrier-breaking pill cost 10,000 upper-rank soul stones, the 2nd transformation cost 20,000, and so on. The 7th transformation cost 70,000, and the 9th transformation cost 90,000. The reason why Zhao Ming came to this forest was because one of the swordsmen who saw Chu Mu leave was his junior. Other than Zhao Ming, there was also a group of swordsmen who came here to search for Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. In a cave in the forest, the luminous pearl was emitting a bright light. Two figures were sitting not far away from each other with their eyes closed, as if they were cultivating. These two people were Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng. A month ago, he flew here and occupied a demonic beast cave. After cleaning it up a little, it became very clean. After giving Xiao Qianfeng a pill, he stayed here and occasionally went out to check on the situation. After a month of cultivation, Xiao Qianfeng had almost recovered. However, because of the consumption of 10 years of lifespan, he looked a little older. He looked a little like a 30-year-old man, and his face was a little pale. According to the Shura sword of Gojoseon, as long as he used the pill to replenish his lifespan, he would be able to recover without any side effects. One had to admit that the death-forbidden art was very powerful. It gave Xiao Qianfeng the ability to kill normal Origin Realm swordsmen. Of course, the price was also very high. After all, after using it, he would fall into a coma and most likely die. Even if he did not die, 10 years of lifespan was a huge price to pay for a Chi-Hai swordsman. Only an ancient sword of Gojoseon like the Shura sword of Gojoseon was not worthy of his attention. After a month, other than cultivating the desolate sky sword Chi normally, Chu Mu mainly focused on comprehending the burying heaven secret sword art. With his comprehension ability, he only used 10 days to comprehend it. After that, he started to cultivate it. Now, he had already cultivated the burying heaven secret sword art to the minor completion level. If Zhang Tian knew about this, he would be extremely jealous. Thinking back, he had spent a few years to reach the entry level and even longer to reach the minor completion level. At this moment, Chu Mu heard the stone that sealed the cave being touched. He immediately woke up and turned around to look. His eyes narrowed slightly. In this month, there were some swordsmen that came here, but they were all killed by Chu Mu. Because they were all Chi-Hai swordsmen, they were not a match for Chu Mu. Although the forest was very big, and the cave was quite remote, Chu Mu could not guarantee that no one would find this place. Two people. After moving the stone away, a person walked in and took in everything in the cave. He was stunned at first, but then he revealed an expression of ecstasy. "It's the two of you. That's great. My 7-turn barrier breaking pellet and now my 8-turn barrier breaking pellet." This person was the 9th turn 7th turn realm swordsman, Zhao Ming. This place was very remote, and he found this place purely by luck. He did not expect to find Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng. It was really a pleasant surprise. Zhao Ming felt that the heavens were giving him a chance to break through to the 9th turn. After that, it would be more likely for him to break through to the Origin Realm. Hearing what the other person said, Chu Mu was stunned at first, but then he reacted and his eyes lit up. A 9th turn realm swordsman should be in the 7th turn. Chu Mu felt that this was a novelty. Although a 9th turn realm swordsman was not as strong as an Origin Realm swordsman, he had seen many Origin Realm swordsmen. A 9th turn realm swordsman usually did not travel outside, so this was the first time he had seen one. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 501. Don't worry, I won't kill you. Zhao Ming's eyes lit up as he excitedly said, "Because you are more valuable alive." Chu Mu had already heard the news before. If he found them and reported the news, he would be rewarded with 10,000 upper-grade spiritual stones. If he killed them and brought their heads back, he would be rewarded with 50,000 upper-grade spiritual stones. If he captured them alive and brought them back to the Buried Heaven Sword sect, he would be rewarded with 100,000 upper-grade spiritual stones. Obviously, Zhao Ming's plan was to capture Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng alive to earn 100,000 upper-grade spiritual stones. You must have used some kind of forbidden technique to be able to kill an Origin Realm swordsman. I advise you not to resist and surrender to avoid serious injuries, Zhao Ming said again. You are too confident in yourself, Chu Mu said. It seems like you are planning to resist. Although I don't know where your confidence comes from, I will use my sword to crush your confidence. Zhao Ming coldly snorted as he drew his sword and slashed out a sword ray. The dense sword ray cut open the ceiling of the cave and slashed towards Chu Mu. Then, Zhao Ming turned into a shadow and charged towards Chu Mu. His sword carried a dazzling light as if it came from the heavens and turned into a net of light that covered Chu Mu's head. There was nowhere to run. Chu Mu did not plan to run. It was not the right time for Shao Qianfeng to make a move. Holding the demon-slaying sword's hilt, the Tianhuang sword qi surged. His essence, qi, and spirit were raised to the extreme and the buried heaven technique was activated. A rumbling sound rang out from within his body, as if a tsunami was surging. His essence, energy, and soul rose layer by layer, becoming more and more powerful. Chu Mu's body surged with an incomparably terrifying aura. This aura was so imposing and majestic that it instantly caused the net of light to freeze. In just an instant, Chu Mu's essence, qi, and spirit had more than doubled. Moreover, it erupted like a volcano that wanted to destroy the heavens and earth. Under the impact of this terrifying aura, the cave seemed to be about to collapse. Zhao Ming's face was filled with shock. Traces of horror crawled up his face like vines. The demon-slaying sword was unsheathed. Like lightning, a dark golden crescent moon slashed through the air. The dark golden crescent moon was 10 meters long, but it was extremely condensed. It looked as if it was made of refined steel, but it was 100,000 times harder and sharper than real refined steel. Sky-burying secret sword, moon slashing. With the heaven-burying secret sword, the power of the moon-slashing strike increased tenfold. It was even more terrifying. The space in the cave was directly cut open. The edges of the dark golden crescent moon had traces of black fragments. Wherever the dark golden crescent moon passed, the space seemed to be scraped by a layer, revealing a dark color. Zhao Ming's sword light was instantly shattered. The beheading moon was unstoppable. It was incomparably tyrannical as it slashed towards Zhao Ming. Zhao Ming only felt that he had been locked onto. This aura contained a killing intent that caused his entire body to tremble, and his blood to almost freeze. No! With a loud roar, Zhao Ming activated all the sword qi in his body and poured it into the sword in his hand. He swung his sword in front of him, forming a circle in an attempt to block the moon beheading sword. This was his strongest defensive sword move. With a boom, the moon beheading sword struck the circle. In just a breath's time, there was a cracking sound and the circle shattered. Zhao Ming's expression changed greatly. His eyes bulged, and all his strength poured out regardless of the load. The robe on his body exploded, and the terrifying sword qi was like a flood breaking through a dam. His valiant body seemed to be split open, and traces of blood flowed out. Block it for me!" Zhao Ming roared. His sword firmly blocked the dark golden crescent moon that had cut through the circle. With an ear-piercing crack, the sword broke in the middle. The dark golden crescent moon slashed through Zhao Ming's panicked body, splitting it in two. Then, the dark golden crescent moon slashed into the cave wall not far away, splitting open a deep crescent moon mark. It was so deep that the bottom could not be seen. Countless fragments splashed out. Chu Mu only felt that the swollen essence, qi, and spirit poured out along with the sword. His whole body seemed to have been hollowed out, and he lost all his strength. His essence, qi, and spirit fell to the bottom of the valley. His head was dizzy as if it was about to split open. Distracting thoughts filled his mind, and countless shadows shuttled back and forth in his brain. His face was pale, as if he had lost too much blood. His body was weak, and his limbs seemed to have injured from overexertion. Sequelae, this was the sequelae of the buried heaven secret sword. The Buried Heaven Secret Sword could be seen as two parts: the Buried Heaven Technique and the Secret Sword. To practice the Buried Heaven Secret Sword, one must first practice the Buried Heaven Technique. The Buried Heaven Technique was to mobilize all of one's essence, chi, and spirit, to stimulate it to 100%. Then, through burning it, one would be able to increase it by several times in an instant. Essence was the chi and blood in the body, chi was the sword chi in the body, and spirit was the spirit and willpower. These three were the most important components of a swordsman. They were incomparably important, and one could not be missing. Otherwise, it would affect the future of a swordsman. Performing the Buried Heaven Technique would burn one's essence, chi, and spirit, causing the intensity and height of one's essence, chi, and spirit to increase exponentially. After that, one would need to find a way to release it, and this method was the Secret Sword. The Secret Sword was not a specific sword move, but a technique. It could be used in most of the sword moves or sword skills. For example, Chu Mu had used it in Beheading Moon, causing its power to increase by 10 times. Of course, it was not that easy to use the Secret Sword in a sword skill. Since ancient times, most of the swordsmen who practiced the Buried Heaven Secret Sword could only release the power that was increased by burning essence, chi, and spirit. The difference between the power and using the Secret Sword to activate a sword skill was like heaven and earth. Like Chu Mu, who had trained the Buried Heaven Secret Sword to the minor completion level in a short month, and was able to use the Secret Sword to activate a sword skill, it was unprecedented. After the essence, chi, and spirit was burned, it would turn into a destructive flame. Then, it would be released through the sword skill using the Secret Sword, and it would be consumed in an instant. Therefore, people would feel dizzy and weak all over. This was the after effect of the Buried Heaven Secret Sword. Fortunately, essence, chi, and spirit were different from lifespan. Once one's lifespan was consumed, it could not be recovered automatically. However, if one wanted to recover quickly, they would need to take some elixirs to help. Chu Mu's strong willpower supported him so that he would not fall down. He took out the elixirs from his spatial bracelet with difficulty. These elixirs were found in the spatial bracelet of the Deshang swordsman who had been killed by the Shura sword of Gojoseon. Spirit Calming Elixir, an elixir used to replenish spirit. Its effect was mild. Essence Blood Elixir, an elixir used to replenish chi and blood. Its effect was obvious. After consuming the 2 pills, the medicinal effects quickly spread. One flowed into his mental world, while the other flowed through his entire body. Chu Mu immediately felt a bit better. The distracting thoughts in his mind weren't as intense, and the powerlessness in his body wasn't as obvious. As time passed, he quickly recovered. As for the Sky Desolation Sword Chi, it could only be recovered by absorbing the pure Desolation Chi from the Sky Desolation Stone. This would take more time. After gaining the ability to move, Chu Mu quickly walked to the entrance of the cave. He pushed the huge rock and blocked the entrance once again. Then, he returned to the cave and took out Zhao Ming's spatial bracelet. He buried the corpse and took out the Sky Desolation Stone to absorb. This place was very remote, and it was not easy to be found. Therefore, after a day, Chu Mu finally recovered completely. His essence, chi, and spirit were all restored to their peak state. If I can cultivate the Buried Heaven Secret Sword to the Deshang level, not only will I be able to use it faster, the consumption of essence, chi, and spirit will be less. Chu Mu thought to himself. The power of the Buried Heaven Secret Sword was fixed, which was a 10-fold increase. However, the higher the level of cultivation, the faster one could use it. The consumption would also be less, and the side effects would be smaller. Currently, Chu Mu could only use the Buried Heaven Secret Sword once. If he could upgrade it to the Deshang level, he might be able to use it twice. Even if he couldn't use it twice, he wouldn't be in a situation where he couldn't protect himself after using it. With my current strength, 10 times the power of the Moon Severing Sword, I can kill a 7th transformation swordsman. I should be able to kill an 8th transformation swordsman as well. As for a 9th transformation swordsman, I might barely be able to kill one. It seems like I'll have to rely on Senior Azura Sword of Gojoseon when I encounter an Origin Realm swordsman. Chumu couldn't help but bitterly smile. The idea of using the Buried Heaven secret sword to kill an Origin Realm swordsman had temporarily fallen through. However, if his sword intent was increased to 25%, he might be able to pose a great threat to an Origin Realm swordsman if he used the Buried Heaven secret sword. However, right now, Chumu's sword intent was only at 22%. Junior brother, I'll have to trouble you for this month, Xiao Qianfeng said as he woke up from his cultivation. It's nothing. However, the Buried Heaven Sword sect has put a bounty on us. The two of us aren't strong enough to fight against the Buried Heaven Sword sect, Chumu said. Although Chumu could ask the Azura Sword of Gojoseon to help him kill all 9 Origin Realm swordsmen, it would consume a lot of the Azura Sword of Gojoseon's spiritual energy. Secondly, it would make Chumu subconsciously rely on it. Unless there was no other way, he didn't want the Azura Sword of Gojoseon to help him. Of course, Chumu still had another trick up his sleeve, the Meteor Sword energy. However, this trump card was something that could threaten the Sword of Gojoseon. Using it to deal with some Origin Realm swordsman was a waste. Chumu planned to use it in a more advantageous situation. What do you think, junior brother? Xiao Qianfeng asked with a hoarse voice after thinking for a while. Us two brothers will leave this place first and find a place to cultivate. In a year or two, once we reach the pinnacle, we'll head to Heavenly Connecting Peak to challenge the Heavenly Connecting Sword Tower. Then, we'll start breaking through. Once we break through to the Origin Realm, we'll have enough strength to fight against the Heaven-Burying Sword sect. Xiao Qianfeng didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pondered over what Chumu said. Junior brother's words make sense. After 10 breaths, Xiao Qianfeng nodded in agreement with Chumu's suggestion. Indeed, their current strength wasn't weak. If they used their full strength, they could kill Origin Realm swordsmen. However, the price they had to pay was great. They couldn't use it often. Their normal strength was obviously not enough to fight against the Buried Heaven Sword sect. However, if they were in the Origin Realm, it would be a different story. At that time, they would be able to contend with the Heaven-Burying Sword sect. Those swordsmen who had designs on the two of them would have to reconsider their own strength to see if they were enough to kill the two of them. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 502. 2 figures tore through the air like lightning, leaving behind 2 streaks of light. They whooshed into the distance as if they were going to fly to the ends of the earth. Junior brother, when I first arrived at the central main sword region, I've heard of the mystical Heavenly Sword Gorge. I've always wanted to come here, but unfortunately, I never had the time until now. Xiao Qianfeng transmitted his sword energy. I hope we can raise our strength to the limit in Heavenly Sword Gorge, Chumu replied. Due to the pressure of life and death from the Heaven Burial Sword sect and the desire to become stronger, Chumu and Xiao Qianfeng avoided the pursuit of many swordsmen. They left the Sky Connecting Mountain and headed straight for Heavenly Sword Gorge. In the blink of an eye, the two flew over the land and entered a lake. This lake was called the Chaotic Star Lake. As the wind blew, small splashes of water formed waves that slowly surged. Under the sunlight, the waves sparkled like countless crystals, but also like a dense cluster of stars that flickered endlessly. The chaotic star lake seemed to stretch as far as the eye could see. Chumu and Xiao Qianfeng raised their speed to the limit. The sword energy wings on their backs flapped, and they shot out like an aurora. Apart from the two of them, there were also some figures not far away that could be seen flying quickly. Heavenly Sword Gorge is just across from us, Xiao Qianfeng said. Chumu nodded and didn't say anything. They left the Sky Connecting Mountain, causing the Heaven Burial Sword sect's hope of capturing them to fail. As for Xia Yu, according to Chu Mu's secret investigation, he seemed to be hiding and wasn't caught by the Heaven Burial Sword sect. To the Heaven Burial Sword sect, he was just a small character that posed no threat. By the time the Heaven Burial Sword sect remembered to capture Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng's accomplice, Xia Yu, he had already disappeared. Only then could Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng leave without any worries. When they returned, it would be the day of the Heaven Burial Sword sect's destruction. They flew for 3 days and 3 nights. During this time, they passed by many islands on the chaotic Star Lake. These islands were of different sizes. Some were inhabited by humans, while others were barren. On the 4th day, Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng saw land. Behind the land was a canyon. Is this the Heavenly Sword Gorge? Looking at the incomparably huge canyon before them, Chu Mu's eyes were filled with excitement. Xiao Qianfeng was the same. The so-called Heavenly Sword Gorge was formed when a mountain was split open from the middle, resulting in a huge and straight crack. According to the records, the Heavenly Sword Gorge's predecessor was a mountain. As for what it was called, no one knew. Perhaps it was forgotten because it was not important. It happened 10,000 years ago. At that time, the mountain was 5,000 meters high. It was split open by a sword saint. As for why the sword saint split the mountain in half, there were many theories. The most popular one was that the sword saint was chasing an enemy and happened to catch up with him here. With one slash, not only did he eliminate his enemy, but he also split the mountain in half. When the mountain was split apart, it was no longer a mountain, but a canyon. The canyon was at least 5,000 meters high, towering between heaven and earth. This was because the sword saint's slash contained his own sword intent. It filled the entire canyon and permeated every inch of the canyon, causing a fundamental change. If any living creature approached within 100 miles, their souls would be crushed by the terrifying and intense sword intent. Their souls would scatter and they would die. As a result, this canyon formed by the splitting of the mountain was called the Heavenly Sword Gorge. Heavenly Sword meant the sword of heaven's might. After 5,000 years, the sword intent here weakened to a level that powerful sword of Gojoseon could withstand. At that time, powerful sword of Gojoseon level experts would come here to resist the sword intent here. At the same time, they would comprehend and improve their own understanding of the sword Tao. After another 3,000 years, the sword intent weakened to a level that powerful sword of Gojoseon level experts could withstand. It no longer had any effect on sword of Gojoseon level experts, so the swordsmen who came here to comprehend became powerful sword of Gojoseon level experts. Now, the sword intent had weakened again and was no longer effective on powerful sword of Gojoseon level experts. Only weaker sword of Gojoseon level and below could benefit from the sword intent. However, swordsmen who had yet to comprehend sword intent were still unable to approach this place, even though the range of the sword intent in the Heavenly Sword Gorge had shrunk from 100 miles to 10 miles. The Heavenly Sword Gorge was completely barren. At a glance, it seemed to be formed from a mixture of yellowish-brown stones and mud. Not a single blade of grass grew. Because the sword intent left behind by the sword saint was far too powerful, all the vegetation at the foot of the mountain had their vitality wiped out and turned to dust. Since then, the mountain had remained barren. As for the interior of the gorge, the sword intent was the strongest and most terrifying. Now, without the strength of a sword of Gojoseon level, it was impossible to enter. Even if it was a normal sword of Gojoseon level, it would be extremely difficult for them to enter the gorge. If they were not careful, their soul would shatter and they would die. Chu Mu glanced around and discovered that other than him and Xiao Qianfeng, there were hundreds of swordsmen scattered around. Most of these swordsmen were at the Origin Realm. A small portion of them were like him and Xiao Qianfeng, Qi High Realm swordsmen who had comprehended sword intent. Of course, if a swordsman who had not comprehended sword intent had some special treasures that could temporarily resist the sword intent's invasion, they would have a great chance of comprehending sword intent. Senior brother, let's go. Chu Mu withdrew his gaze and said as he started walking. They were still 10 miles away, so they could feel the faint sword intent's ripples. However, these ripples would not affect them. After walking about 1,000 meters forward, Chu Mu suddenly felt the sword intent become more intense. Moreover, it was extremely tenacious. Wave after wave, it was as if the waves were endless and endless. This sword intent did not target the body, but the mind. Once the mind could not withstand the sword intent's attack and collapsed, the soul would be injured. Then, the sword intent would directly attack the soul, causing the soul to be destroyed. Chu Mu immediately removed all distracting thoughts and focused 120% of his sword intent. He used his 22% sword intent to resist the unceasing sword intent's attack. Xiao Qianfeng was the same. However, Xiao Qianfeng's sword intent was not as strong as Chu Mu's, so it was a bit harder for him to resist. Chu Mu resisted as he walked forward. If he wanted to achieve the best effect of comprehending sword intent, he would have to challenge his own limit. Right now, he was only 10 miles away from the Heavenly Sword Gorge and was only being attacked by the sword intent's attack. He was still very far from his limit. His footsteps were very fast. In the blink of an eye, Chu Mu had advanced another 1 mile. The sword intent's strength had increased by a lot, but Chu Mu still did not feel like he had reached his limits. Not long after, Chu Mu had advanced another 1 mile. At this point, he started to feel the pressure from the sword intent's attack. It was already unbearable. Xiao Qianfeng was behind Chu Mu and stopped at a distance of 8 miles away from the Heavenly Sword Gorge. He wanted to take a step forward, but it was as if he was blocked by an invisible wall. He was unable to land his foot on the ground. His face was pale. In the end, he could only helplessly withdraw his foot and sit down cross-legged. This was already his limit. Chu Mu unceasingly blocked the unceasing sword intent attacks, using his own 22% sword intent to firmly resist. After silently standing there for a moment, he lifted his foot and stepped forward, heavily stepping down. In an instant, Chu Mu felt that the oncoming sword intent seemed to have strengthened by a sliver. In a spurt of energy, he continuously took 3 steps forward. He only stopped when he was 2 miles away. He felt that this was his current limit. Looking at the strength of the sword intent in the Heavenly Sword Gorge will most likely dissipate in another 500 years, a voice sounded in Chu Mu's ears. It was the Azura sword of Gojoseon's soft sigh. At this moment, Chu Mu did not dare to be distracted. He was completely focused on using his 22% sword intent to resist the sword intent of the Heavenly Sword Gorge. As a result, he was unable to respond to the Azura sword of Gojoseon's words. The Azura sword of Gojoseon seemed to know this as well, but he still sighed to himself. Several thousand years ago, I also came here to resist and comprehend the sword intent. The sword intent back then was many times stronger than it is now. The sword saint who split open the Heavenly Sword Gorge was called the Unending Sword Saint. The sword intent he comprehended was called the Unending Sword Intent. It means endless. As a result, the sword intent left behind by the Unending Sword Saint is an elemental sword intent. It is more tenacious and condensed than normal sword intent, and it also has a continuous and endless feeling. The Azura sword of Gojoseon said slowly, "The current strength of the Heavenly Sword Gorge's sword intent is about 10% of 1 mile. You need to have a sword intent of the same strength to resist it. However, the elemental sword intent is more powerful than normal sword intent, and it also has various abilities that normal sword intents do not have. For example, the Unending Sword Intent is not much stronger than normal sword intent in terms of strength. Its main characteristic is that it is endless and continuous. This is also the reason why this sword intent can remain in the heavenly sword gorge for 10,000 years without dissipating. Chu Mu heard everything the Azura sword of Gojoseon said. Although he did not dare to be distracted, he was still able to remember everything the Azura sword of Gojoseon said. Among the elemental sword intents, the destruction sword intent is the most destructive. It is more than twice as powerful as normal sword intent. The annihilation sword intent is slightly weaker, while the slaughter sword intent is about the same as the annihilation sword intent. The unending sword intent that remains here is only about 20% stronger than normal sword intent. The Azura sword of Gojoseon continued, explaining the differences between sword intents to Chu Mu. It opened a whole new door for Chu Mu, allowing him to see even more mysteries. Those who inherit the Mahayana sword Tao will often be able to comprehend the related elemental sword intent. Only then will they be able to display the power of the sword Tao to the extreme and walk further on the path of the sword Tao. However, since you have decided to walk the path of creating your own sword Tao, you must comprehend your own elemental sword intent. When the time comes, creating your own sword intent will be twice the result with half the effort. In comparison, Shao Qianfeng did not have Chu Mu's luck. Of course, Shao Qianfeng, who had inherited the lifeless sword Tao, might know about this. However, Chu Mu had never asked, and he had never mentioned it. Although the Azura sword of Gojoseon had the intention of taking Shao Qianfeng as his disciple, he had only told Chu Mu so far. This was because he was not 100% sure that he wanted to take Shao Qianfeng as his disciple. Thus, Shao Qianfeng did not know about the existence of the Azura sword of Gojoseon. When he knew about the existence of the Azura sword of Gojoseon, it would probably be the time for him to become the Azura sword of Gojoseon's disciple. The Azura sword of Gojoseon seemed to have finished speaking, and fell silent again. Chu Mu was still bitterly resisting the unending sword intent. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 503. The seemingly endless and unending sword intent kept rushing over. The source was the heavenly sword gorge that had been split open by the sword. Chu Mu had been sitting there for 3 days and 3 nights. This had attracted many people's attention. Even Shao Qianfeng was shocked. Because 2 days ago, Shao Qianfeng had retreated 5 kilometers away from the never-ending sword intent because he was unable to withstand the impact of the never-ending sword intent. He rested for an entire half a day before he once again walked into the range of the never-ending sword intent and resisted it once more. Even though 10,000 years had passed, even though the never-ending sword intent had weakened, from the point where even the sword of Gojoseon couldn't withstand it to the point where any swordsman who had comprehended sword intent could withstand it. After all, the never-ending sword intent was left behind by a sword saint. It was still very powerful. In the face of this endless and continuous sword intent, it was as if he was standing in the sea and being hit by endless waves. Using one's own sword intent consumed mental strength. Although the mental strength consumed each time wasn't much and could be recovered with some time, the problem was that when facing the impact of the never-ending sword intent, one couldn't find the slightest time to recover mental strength. As time passed, one's mental strength would continue to be consumed. Once it was depleted, not only would one be unable to use sword intent to resist the impact of the never-ending sword intent, one would even fall unconscious. Once one fainted, one's mental world would be damaged or even shattered by the impact of the never-ending sword intent. This would affect one's soul and ultimately cause one's soul to disperse. Therefore, every swordsman who came here to resist the never-ending sword intent to increase their own sword intent would pay close attention to the consumption of their mental strength. Once it reached 80%, they would immediately retreat and leave the range of 10 miles away. They would either wait for their mental strength to recover or use pills or special treasures that could speed up the recovery of their mental strength. after their mental strength recovered to its peak, they would enter the range of the never-ending sword intent again. If they wanted to wait for their mental strength to recover naturally, the speed would be very slow. A normal swordsman would need at least a day and a night. Xiao Qianfeng had taken pills similar to the spirit-calming pill to recover to its peak in half a day. However, it had been 3 days and 3 nights since Chu Mu had entered the range of the never-ending sword intent. Yet, he was still resisting the never-ending sword intent. It was impossible for a sword Grand Master swordsman to do so. Only those in the astral realm could do so. If it weren't for the fact that there wasn't a hint of pain on his face, others would have thought that he was unable to move due to overexertion of his mental strength. Junior brother Chu is really mysterious and unfathomable. Xiao Qianfeng sighed lightly and entered the range of the never-ending sword intent once again. This time, he took a step forward. Although it wasn't much, it showed that he had made slight progress in his sword intent. Where did this young man come from? Many of the primary realm swordsmen who had noticed Chu Mu began to guess. They could see that Chu Mu's cultivation level was only at the peak of the Qi High Realm, and he had not reached the peak of the Qi High Realm. Being able to comprehend sword intent was already surprising, but what was even more surprising was that he was 8 miles away from the Heavenly Sword Gorge. This meant that his comprehension of sword intent had exceeded 20%. Originally, they thought that this young man was a genius in their hearts. But now, this young man had been under the attack of the never-ending sword intent for 3 days and 3 nights without any signs of discomfort. Was he a monster? Chu Mu didn't know what others thought of him. Although he had some understanding of the Heavenly Sword Gorge, he didn't care about some common sense. After all, as long as one wasn't an idiot, they would know that retreating when one's mental strength was about to run out was an instinct of life. The reason why Chu Mu was able to hold on for so long was because of his powerful soul. His soul was 10 times stronger than other swordsmen of the same level. Although he hadn't fully unleashed his potential yet, in terms of strength and quality, he could at least unleash 3 times the power. This 3 times meant that Chu Mu had more and purer mental strength, as well as a faster recovery speed. It was an obvious advantage. This was also the reason why Chu Mu was able to hold on for 3 days and 3 nights and was labeled as a monster. However, after holding on for so long, Chu Mu felt that he only had about 70% of his mental strength left. Although he could at least hold on for half a day or more, in order to ensure his own safety, it was necessary to conserve 30% of his mental strength. He stood up and took a step back. Immediately, he felt that the never-ending sword intent had weakened quite a bit. As soon as Chu Mu moved, many swordsmen's gazes were attracted to him. After all, not all swordsmen wanted to push themselves to the limit. After retreating 10 miles away, Chu Mu didn't take out any elixirs to consume. Instead, he sat down cross-legged and meditated, recovering his mental strength according to the meditation technique of a swordsman. After about 4 hours, Chu Mu's mental strength had completely recovered. Recovering mental strength was good. For example, filling a pool with water. The larger the pool, the higher the upper limit of mental strength, and the longer it would take to fill it. However, if the small water pipe was replaced with a large water pipe, the result would be different. For example, one would have a stronger soul. Since his mental strength had completely recovered, Chu Mu took out some rations to fill his stomach. Then, he walked back into the never-ending sword intent area and walked back to his original position. Chu Mu's appearance shocked many swordsmen. A few of them were almost injured by the never-ending sword intent because they relaxed their mind. They were so frightened that their faces turned pale. They didn't dare to be distracted and focused on resisting. Freak! What a freak! Many swordsmen roared in their hearts. At the same time, they were envious and jealous. One had to know that the longer one resisted the never-ending sword intent, the better the effect. For example, Chu Mu, resisting the never-ending sword intent for 3 days and 3 nights at a time, the effect was at least 5 times better than others who resisted for 1 day and night and then rested. Time passed bit by bit. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. In a month, Xiao Qianfeng rested a total of 20 times. The total amount of time he rested added up to about 10 days. However, Chu Mu was completely different. In a month, the total amount of time he rested didn't even reach 2 days. His harvest was 3 times more than Xiao Qianfeng's. Sword intent at 24%. This heavenly sword gorge is really an excellent place to comprehend sword intent. Chu Mu sighed as he rested again. Originally, he would need at least 3 months of comprehension to increase his sword intent by 1%. Especially after his sword intent reached 20%, it would take even longer to increase it by 1%. He didn't expect that his sword intent would reach 24% from the original 22% in just a month in the Heavenly Sword Gorge. Although it had been a while since it reached 22% and wasn't far from 23%, this speed was still many times faster than before. I'll stay here and increase my sword intent to the limit. I'll also cultivate the Heavenly Desolation sword qi in my spare time. Chu Mu said to himself. Now, when he recovered his mental strength, he would take out the Heavenly Desolation stone to absorb it. This method of recovering and cultivating at the same time was relatively common here. Therefore, he didn't pay much attention to Chu Mu's situation. The further one's sword intent went, the harder it was to increase it. Especially for Qi High Realm swordsmen, it was already very impressive to be able to comprehend sword intent. Increasing sword intent to 20% was extremely rare. Increasing sword intent beyond 20% was even rarer and more difficult. Otherwise, with the talent of Zhu Wudao and Yan Zhiyo, coupled with the large amount of resources from the sword sect, they wouldn't only be able to comprehend sword intent to 25%. One had to know that there were sword saints in the 10 major sword sects. Although the 10 major sword sects didn't necessarily have a place like the Heavenly Sword Gorge, they did have similar treasures. Cultivating every day allowed Chu Mu's sword qi to increase bit by bit. As long as he reached the peak, his sword intent would also reach the limit of what he could comprehend. Then, he would be able to break through to the 9th transformation realm. The limit of a Qi High Realm swordsman's sword intent was closely related to the swordsman's spirit and will. To put it bluntly, it was directly related to the soul. With Chu Mu's soul, the limit of his sword intent would definitely be higher than other swordsmen. Time passed, month after month. Some swordsmen reached their limit and left. There were also new swordsmen who arrived to comprehend sword intent. Although the limit of the Heavenly Sword Gorge was for people to comprehend sword intent to 100%, not everyone could do so. There was a limit. Once one reached the limit, they would not be able to comprehend sword intent anymore. They would have to rely on themselves to slowly comprehend sword intent and slowly improve. In the blink of an eye, half a year had passed. His sword qi was still at the complete Qi High Realm, but it had improved a lot compared to half a year ago. According to Chu Mu's estimation, his sword qi would be able to reach the peak of the complete Qi High Realm within the next half year. Sword intent. I have finally reached 27%. Chu Mu's face revealed a sincere smile. 27% sword intent was much stronger than the previous 22%. If he used the Beheading Moon and the Burying Heaven Secret Sword, he would definitely be able to kill a normal Origin Realm swordsman. I feel that my sword intent has not reached its limit yet. I can continue to improve it. 28%, 29%, or even 30%. After improving his sword intent to this point, every improvement would be harder. Chu Mu did not dare to hope for too much. In this half a year, Xiao Qianfeng's sword intent had also improved a lot. Although the improvement could not be compared to Chu Mu's, it was still more than 20%. It had reached 21%. Compared to half a year ago, it had increased by 20%. As for sword qi, Xiao Qianfeng had already reached the peak of the complete Qi High Realm. Now all he needed to do was to increase his sword intent to the limit and control the heaven and earth spirit chi to 100%. Then, he would be able to break through to the 9th transformation realm. In the blink of an eye, another half a year had passed. A boom reverberated in Chu Mu's mental world like a thunderclap. 30%. My sword intent has reached 30%. Chu Mu's body trembled as ecstasy surged in his heart. 30% sword intent. He felt a bit of disbelief. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 504. 30% sword intent is my current limit. I can't improve it any further. Another month passed. Chu Mu sat cross-legged 7 miles away from the Sky Sword Gorge. He looked a little helpless. Immediately, his eyebrows relaxed. He felt that he was a little greedy. To be able to comprehend 30% sword intent in the Chi High realm, he believed that there were not many people in history who could do that. The Tianhuang sword Chi has also reached its peak. My control of the spiritual Chi of heaven and earth has also reached 100%. The current me has accumulated to the limit. I can break through to the 9th transformation realm at any time. Chu Mu muttered to himself in a voice that only he could hear. However, breaking through to the 9th transformation realm was not a small matter. It was a matter of great importance. If he was not careful, it could affect his future. However, Chu Mu was not willing to find a secret place to seclude himself for a year or two like other people. Taking a step back, as a scattered swordsman who did not join any sect, it was very difficult to find a secret and safe place to seclude himself. Didn't you get a great sword forging technique? The Shura sword of Gojoseon seemed to know what Chu Mu was thinking and said, Senior, what advice do you have? Chu Mu's eyes lit up. The Shura sword of Gojoseon was an ancient sword of Gojoseon. His knowledge and experience were not something that he could compare with. Do you know that in ancient times, every truly powerful swordsman had mastered the great sword forging technique? The Shura sword of Gojoseon said slowly. Senior sword of Gojoseon, a swordsman needs to be fully focused when practicing the sword. To climb to the peak of the way of the sword, one needs to spend a lot of time. If one is distracted while forging the sword, won't it delay the progress and cause the last two things to fail? Chu Mu asked. This was his current thought. At the same time, it was also a tacit statement that was passed down in the ancient sword continent. Foolish! The Azura sword of Gojoseon shouted, but then fell silent. After a long while, he spoke again. It is normal for you to think this way. After all, under normal circumstances, a swordsman's energy is limited. He can only focus on one thing. Once he is distracted, it is very likely that he will end up with two things in the end. Chu Mu didn't say anything. He felt that the Azura sword of Gojoseon wasn't finished yet. There would be a twist. However, there are exceptions to everything. A swordsman practicing the sword is also refining the sword. Practicing and refining are different, but they complement each other. The Azura sword of Gojoseon organized his words and continued, Do you know that the top 10 sword sects of the central main sword domain have not only passed down the Mahayana sword Tao, but they also have a sword forging technique? The great art of sword forging is different from the art of sword forging. The art of sword forging is just a small skill. Those who master the art of sword forging can only stop at the level of sword forging grandmaster. At most, they can only forge top-grade swords. However, with the great art of sword forging, one can become a sword forging grandmaster or even a sword forging grandmaster. They can forge royal grade swords or even swords above royal grade. The Azura sword of Gojoseon's tone was slightly excited. A truly brilliant swordsman will forge the swords he uses himself. This is because only he knows his own characteristics and need. He can forge the most suitable sword according to his own needs, and he can unleash even greater power. In addition, while forging the sword, it is also a kind of sorting out one's swordsmanship, allowing one to further understand the path of the sword Tao. The Azura sword of Gojoseon concluded, in short, since you have a great art of sword forging, you should cultivate it well. It will be more beneficial for you. I suggest that when you break through to the 9th transformation realm, you don't have to specially find a secret place. As the saying goes, great hermits hide in the city. This is precisely the case. The effect is better than going into seclusion. Doing the opposite. After hearing the Azura sword of Gojoseon's words, Chu Mu's mind became active. Indeed, on the ancient sword continent, when most of the sword practitioners wanted to break through to the 9th transformation realm, they would find a secluded place and go into seclusion to avoid being disturbed. They would only come out after breaking through to the origin realm. If it was short, it would take 1 or 2 years. If it was long, it would take more than 10 years. Some swordsmen would even go into seclusion for dozens of years without coming out. Senior, when ancient swordsmen broke through to the 9th transformation realm, did they go into seclusion like now or? Chu Mu's mind flashed as he suddenly asked. They didn't go into seclusion. The Azura sword of Gojoseon was silent for a moment before answering. In fact, although the Azura sword of Gojoseon was an ancient sword of Gojoseon, compared to the ancient times, it was still countless years away. The reason why it knew these secrets was because it was eager to learn and was especially interested in ancient matters. It had spent a lot of time researching. Otherwise, with its talent, it wouldn't have only cultivated to the sword of Gojoseon level. It would have reached the sword saint level long ago. If you are willing, then listen to me and do what an ancient swordsman should do. The Azura sword of Gojoseon said. Senior sword of Gojoseon wouldn't harm me. Why wouldn't I listen? Moreover, I also yearn to be an ancient swordsman. What kind of glory would that be? Chu Mu smiled. When ancient swordsmen broke through to the 9th transformation realm, they would travel outside as usual. Most of them would have their own elders secretly following and protecting them. Most of them would be able to break through the 9th transformation realm and reach the origin realm within a few years. A small number of swordsmen wouldn't have their elders following them because they have the ability to protect themselves. It would be easy for such swordsmen to become the sword of Gojoseon in the future. The Azura sword of Gojoseon said, Since you have decided to imitate the ancient swordsman, there is one thing you must do before breaking through to the 9th transformation realm. What is it? Chu Mu's tone became serious when he heard the Azura sword of Gojoseon's serious words. Condense the sword soul. The Azura sword of Gojoseon said solemnly, word by word. Condense the sword soul? Chu Mu revealed a shocked expression. Of course, he knew what a sword soul was. There were 5 titles for swordsmen: Sword Hero, Sword Sovereign, Sword of Gojoseon, Sword Saint, and Sword God. To obtain the title of Sword Hero, one needed to master sword force to perfection and fulfill other conditions. As for Sword Sovereign, it corresponded to sword intent. Then, the sword soul was above the sword intent and corresponded to the sword of Gojoseon. In other words, only by comprehending the sword intent to perfection and obtaining some sort of opportunity, could one finally condense the sword soul and incorporate the sword intent into the sword soul. At that time, the sword intent would become even more condensed and powerful, and its power would increase exponentially. Senior sword of Gojoseon, I have only comprehended 30% of the sword intent. Chu Mu was shocked and puzzled at the same time. I know that when the sword intent reaches perfection and then condenses the sword soul, this is what ordinary swordsmen do. However, ancient swordsmen would condense the sword soul before their sword intent reaches perfection. Once the sword soul is condensed and the sword intent reaches perfection, as long as one's cultivation level is high enough, the sword of Gojoseon will naturally be formed. The Azura sword of Gojoseon said solemnly, I know of a secret technique for ancient swordsmen to condense the sword soul. The minimum requirement is 30% of the sword intent and a powerful soul. Supplemented by the sword soul spiritual root as a primer, there is at least a 50% chance of condensing the sword soul. With the strength of your soul, the success rate of condensing the sword soul should be more than 50%. When Chu-Mu was silent, the Azura sword of Gojoseon continued, if the condensation is successful, the sword soul will be formed. If the condensation fails, if you are lucky, you will suffer some damage and recover in a few years. If you are unlucky, the sword intent will be scattered and your soul will be damaged. You may not be able to advance for the rest of your life. The choice is up to you. This was a big matter, so Chu-Mu did not answer immediately. Instead, he pondered. On one hand, success meant reaching the heavens, and failure meant entering a bottomless abyss. On the other hand, he could give up and follow the swordsman of the ancient sword continent, cultivating step by step. Chu-Mu stood in the middle. How should he choose? If he did not know, Chu-Mu would not have been in a difficult position. But now that he knew, everything was different. The sword is an unconventional path. A swordsman must bravely forge ahead, cutting through all obstacles. Chu-Mu thought to himself. His eyes suddenly became resolute, and there was a trace of light flowing in them. The 30% sword intent was ready to move. He clenched his fists and said, Senior Sword of Gojoseon, I choose to condense the sword soul. Good. The Shura sword of Gojoseon's tone had a kind of heartfelt gratification. In the past year, you have been receiving the impact of the unending sword intent. Although your sword intent is not an elemental sword intent, it is more condensed, tenacious, and powerful than a normal swordsman's sword intent. In terms of power, it is not inferior to a normal 30% sword intent. Moreover, your soul is very powerful. As long as you are fully prepared, the success rate of condensing the sword soul will not be lower than 70%. Even if you fail, with me watching from the side, you will not be injured. Senior Sword of Gojoseon, what should I do next? Chu-Mu's eyes shone. Enter the Heavenly Sword Gorge and search for the Sword Soul spiritual root. The higher the quality of the Sword Soul spiritual root, the better the effect. The Shura Sword of Gojoseon said, You don't have to worry. Just walk forward. With me here, nothing will happen. Hearing this, Chu-Mu immediately stood up and took a step forward. After landing, he took a second step, which suddenly became very difficult. The unending sword intense power had increased by a lot, almost causing his resistance to collapse. The moment Chu-Mu moved, he immediately attracted the attention of many swordsmen in the surroundings. They were all shocked and their attention was all on Chu-Mu. As his step landed, a strange scene appeared. It was as if there was no resistance at all. In the eyes of others, Chu-Mu's speed suddenly increased. In the blink of an eye, he had crossed 100 meters. His speed was getting faster and faster. Finally, he approached the Heavenly Sword Gorge like a flash of lightning. At the front, there was a powerful Origin Realm swordsman. He was only 1 mile away from the Heavenly Sword Gorge. This meant that this swordsman had already comprehended 90% of his sword intent. Immediately after, this powerful swordsman felt his vision blur. A figure instantly passed him and rushed towards the Heavenly Sword Gorge. What is going on? This powerful swordsman was stunned. He rubbed his eyes hard and looked again. His eyeballs almost popped out. Chu-Mu couldn't feel the slightest bit of the unending sword intense impact. However, he was very excited and his blood was boiling. He was very clear that the unending sword intense impact here was very terrifying. If it wasn't for the Shura sword of Gojoseon blocking it, his spiritual world would have been destroyed in an instant. Even his soul would have been destroyed. With a whoosh, Chu-Mu's figure disappeared from everyone's sight. He rushed into the Heavenly Sword Gorge as if he had never appeared. It was like an illusion. All that was left was the mountain breeze and a group of swordsmen who were dumbfounded. They all looked as if they had seen a ghost. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 505. The interior of the Heavenly Sword Canyon was extremely dark. Even if Chu Mu had the perfect vision sword, he was still unable to ignore this kind of darkness. It greatly interfered with his vision, and he could only see things within a few dozen meters. Anything beyond 50 meters would become blurry, and anything beyond 100 meters would become blurry. Even if he looked at things a few meters away, he would feel like an ordinary person in the evening. Squinting his eyes, a divine light flickered in his eyes. Chu Mu carefully looked around. There were only rocks, barren, devoid of life, and filled with a deathly stillness. The canyon was several hundred meters wide and filled with gravel. In front of him was a canyon passage that led to an unknown place, as if there was no end. On the left and right were mountain walls that were 5,000 meters tall. The mountain walls were straight and smooth, and from top to bottom, they were like tofu that had been cut by a knife. Strong sword intent was constantly being released from the mountain walls and the ground beneath his feet, rushing in all directions and colliding with each other, forming countless sharp sounds that reverberated within the canyon, as if ghosts were circling. Although there was nothing terrifying in this kind of place, this kind of environment was deathly stillness without the slightest bit of life. There was also an inexplicable pressure that went straight to the depths of one's heart and soul. It was enough to make people with weak willpower go crazy. This place is very strange. With your current ability, you can't stay here for too long. Quickly search for the Sword Soul spiritual root. The Azura sword of Gojoseon appeared and reminded. Then, he pointed at Chu Mu's forehead, leaving behind a sword intent to protect Chu Mu, preventing the sword intent here from destroying his spiritual world. Senior, what does the Sword Soul spiritual root look like? Chu Mu asked as he moved quickly. His eyes shot out cold lightning as he carefully scanned every corner. It's the shape of a plant's rhizome. There's a strong sword intent fluctuation. The Azura sword of Gojoseon replied. After 15 minutes, Chu Mu had already carefully scanned the area within a radius of several hundred meters. He didn't find anything other than rocks and soil. And here, the pressure on his soul was increasing bit by bit, making Chu Mu feel a little uncomfortable. Time passed slowly. Chu Mu moved forward a few dozen meters and continued his search. Although he felt a little uncomfortable, it was still within his tolerance range. As long as there is a sword intent left in a place for more than 1,000 years, there is a chance that a sword soul spirit root will appear. The unending sword intent here has been here for more than 10,000 years. It is certain that there is a sword soul spirit root. As the Azura sword of Gojoseon helped search, it said, some plants have their vitality annihilated under the sword intent. However, there are some special existences that can leave behind a little root. As time passes, this root will gradually adapt to the sword intent here. It can even absorb the sword intent bit by bit and eventually become a sword soul spirit root. As Chu Mu listened to the Azura sword of Gojoseon explain the origin of the sword soul spirit root, he searched carefully. However, he still found nothing. Clearly, this sword soul spirit root wasn't a cabbage. The Azura sword of Gojoseon's search method was faster and more direct than Chu Mu's. It released the power of the soul and swept across everything within a radius of several hundred meters. The two searched in different directions. Another 15 minutes passed. Chu Mu felt even more pressure and was even more uncomfortable. Search, search, search. At this moment, Chu Mu wished he could split into 1,000,000 and search the entire canyon. Maybe the sword soul spirit root here has already been dug up by powerful swordsmen. Chu Mu thought to himself. He could only rely on his luck to continue his search. Chu Mu's luck had always been good. After another 15 minutes, just as Chu Mu was starting to feel a little dizzy, he saw something different from the soil and rocks. He quickly rushed over and dug it out. It was a piece of root, about the size of a baby's palm. It was yellowish-brown in color, hard like a rock in his hand, but it exuded strong sword intent fluctuations. Senior Sword of Gojoseon, is this the sword soul spirit root? Chumu raised the thing in his hand and asked. The Azura Sword of Gojoseon appeared beside Chumu with a swoosh sound. He glanced at it and smiled. It is indeed the sword soul spirit root, and a mid-grade one at that. Its effect is better than a low-grade one. In that case, let's leave, Chumu said. The pressure here was making him very uncomfortable. All right. After so many years of digging, the sword soul spirit root here has become very rare. It is already a great fortune to be able to find a mid-grade one, the Azura Sword of Gojoseon said. He turned into a shadow and entered the small dark red sword. Chumu stored the sword soul spirit root in his spatial bracelet and immediately used his movement technique to quickly leave the canyon. He didn't want to stay here for even a second longer. With a swoosh sound, Chumu rushed out of the canyon. The swordsmen outside stared at Chumu with wide eyes. Their bodies trembled as they stared at Chumu in a daze, as if they wanted to see through him. Senior brother, let's go. Chumu transmitted his voice when he passed by Xiao Qianfeng. He spread out his sword chi wings and quickly left. Xiao Qianfeng was stunned at first, but he immediately got up and spread out his sword chi wings and quickly left as well. While many swordsmen were in a daze, Chumu and Xiao Qianfeng were already far away, making their plan to approach Chumu fail. Junior brother, what happened? Xiao Qianfeng couldn't hold back the curiosity in his heart and transmitted his voice. Because Chumu was able to enter the Heavenly Sword Canyon, this was a very inconceivable thing. Xiao Qianfeng was puzzled by the fact that he left immediately after entering. Senior brother will know in the future, Chumu said. Xiao Qianfeng didn't ask any more. Senior brother, how is your comprehension of sword intent? Chumu asked. 25% is my current limit, Xiao Qianfeng replied. I have already reached the limit that I can break through. Me too. After leaving this time, I will find a place to break through, Chumu said. Junior brother, I have a suitable place to break through, but only I can enter. Xiao Qianfeng hesitated for a moment before saying. Senior brother, don't worry. I also have a suitable way to break through. Chumu smiled. That's good. Xiao Qianfeng heaved a sigh of relief. Since that's the case, junior brother, let's go to the Heavenly Sword Pagoda first and break through to the 9th transformation realm. What do you think? You go to the Heavenly Sword Pagoda first. I need some time to organize the secret method of condensing the sword soul. Azura Sword of Gojoseon said. Okay. Chumu immediately answered Xiao Qianfeng. The two of them quickly flew above the chaotic star lake and quickly flew in the direction of the Heavenly Sword Pagoda. In an entire year, Chumu and Xiao Qianfeng seemed to have evaporated into thin air, disappearing without a trace. Buried Heaven Sword Sex people had nowhere to find them. Buried Heaven Sword Sex Senior Buried Heaven was so angry that he almost went crazy. As for the swordsmen who had searched everywhere for Chumu and Xiao Qianfeng in order to obtain high-quality spirit stones, after half a year of hard work, they all quieted down because they didn't have the slightest clue. They didn't know where Chumu and Xiao Qianfeng went, so how could they find them? Therefore, when Chumu and Xiao Qianfeng approached the Heavenly Sword Pagoda again and asked a little, they smiled knowingly. Many things happened in the central sword domain every day. Almost nothing lasted for a long time. For example, the matter of Chumu and Xiao Qianfeng being hunted down passed in just a few months. When the two of them appeared at the top of the Heavenly Sword Mountain again, not many people even noticed them. Even if someone did, they didn't pay much attention, as if they didn't know the two of them. In fact, the two of them belonged to the category of people who were about to be forgotten. Because in this year, the competition for rankings in the Heavenly Sword Pagoda was very fierce, so the swordsmen who often hung around here put all their attention on it. Listening to the discussions of the swordsmen beside them, Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng also understood how fierce the competition for rankings in the Heavenly Sword Pagoda had been in the year they weren't around, especially the competition for the top 10. Glancing at the Heavenly Sword Hero ranking, the first place was Zhong Qintian, the second was Zhu Wudao, the third was Yan Jiao, the fourth was Gu Jianghe, the fifth was Shi Fenglai, the sixth was Demonic Lion Domination, and the seventh was Han Bingyu. As for Chu Mu, he had actually run to the 10th place, and Xiao Qianfeng had run to the 18th place. In just a year, the two of their rankings had dropped greatly. Coupled with the fact that they had never appeared before, they were naturally forgotten by many people. The competition for rankings on the Heavenly Sword Hero ranking was mainly focused on Zhong Qintian, Zhu Wudao, Yan Jiao, Gu Jianghe, Shi Fenglai, Han Bingyu, and Demonic Lion Domination. Every once in a while they would challenge the Heavenly Sword Pagoda and raise their rankings. Not long after, their rankings would be surpassed by others, and so on and so forth. But until now, Zhong Qingtian's best record was still at the 31st level. Zhu Wudao and Yan Jiao were also at the 31st level, while Gu Jianghe had reached the 30th level. As for Shi Fenglai, Han Bingyu, and Demonic Lion Domination, they had all reached the 30th level. At this time, someone was challenging the Heavenly Sword Pagoda, going up level by level. He had already reached the 30th level, and it looked like he was one of the 7. After a while, the 30th level dimmed, and the 31st level lit up. I wonder if Yan Jiao can pass the 31st level this time, and take the championship in one fell swoop? I think it'll be difficult. It's too difficult to pass the 31st level. This year has been really exciting. I wonder who will be ranked first in the end and reach the top with an unsurpassed attitude, breaking through in one fell swoop? After about a quarter of an hour, the 31st level suddenly darkened, and a figure quickly appeared. It was a young swordsman wearing a yellow robe, who looked to be about 27 or 28 years old. He had a very ordinary appearance. But as long as you saw him, you would never forget him, because his temperament was very unique, and his eyes were gray, giving off a lifeless feeling. He was Yan Jiao, a disciple of the Yellow Springs sword sect. Yan Jiao didn't say a word. He only glanced at his ranking and saw that he had jumped to 2nd place. Frowning slightly, he immediately left. Junior brother, I'll challenge the Heavenly Sword Pagoda first. As his voice fell, Xiao Qianfeng turned into a ray of light and rushed into the Heavenly Sword Pagoda. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 506. The 28th level lit up. After a while, the 28th level darkened, and the 29th level lit up. In this year, senior brother Xiao has improved a lot. Chu Mu's face flashed with a smile as he silently said. After a while, the 29th level darkened, but the 30th level lit up. He's reached the 30th level. Who's that guy? I've never seen him before. A portion of the swordsmen at the top of the Heavenly Link Mountain had only arrived in the past year. That person isn't Demonic Lion Duba, nor Shi Fenglai, and definitely not Han Bingyu. Let me think, I think I've seen him before. Some of the swordsmen were deep in thought. After a while, a swordsman's eyes lit up. He glanced at the Heavenly Link Sword Pagoda a few times, then shifted his gaze to Chu Mu. After staring at Chu Mu's face for a while, he quickly turned and left, spreading his wings of sword chi and leaving. Chu Mu quickly turned back and looked at the rapidly departing figure. His heart skipped a beat and he smiled slightly, retracted his gaze, and returned it to the Heavenly Link Sword Pagoda. The 30th level lit up for about 15 minutes, then darkened again. A figure flew out from the Heavenly Link Sword Pagoda and landed steadily. His aura fluctuated greatly, and the terrifying sharpness made the surrounding swordsmen somewhat uncomfortable, and they all retreated to distance themselves. After a while, the rankings on the Heavenly Link Sword Pagoda changed again. Xiao Qianfeng's ranking suddenly rose from 18th to the top 10, and he reached 5th place, surpassing Shi Fenglai and behind Gu Jianghe. Xiao Qianfeng, lifeless sword hero, so he's Xiao Qianfeng, one of the two wanted by the Buried Heaven sword sect a year ago. So the person who came with him should be Zhen Tian sword hero Chu Mu. As the swordsmen's voices fell, Chu Mu had already turned into a ray of light and rushed into the Heavenly Link Sword Pagoda. Hurry up and tell the Heaven-Burying Sword sect about this. 10,000 high-grade spirit stones. I don't think the Heaven's Burial Sword sect will be able to do anything to them. So, if you want to offend two powerful swordsmen with limitless futures, you can report to the Heaven's Burial Sword sect. Those true geniuses usually had great luck. It was possible to kill them, but the prerequisite was that one had enough strength. However, many far-sighted swordsmen believed that with the strength of the Burying Heaven Sword sect, it was not possible to kill two geniuses with great luck. Even if they could kill one of them, if one of them escaped, the consequences would be very serious. When they grew up, they would be very terrifying. The entire Buried Heaven Sword sect would be destroyed because of this. Those who reported the news would most likely be avenged. Only a fool would put himself in danger for the sake of 10,000 high-grade spirit stones. Of course, when the forest was big, there would be all kinds of bird. Moreover, only a few were wise and the majority were fools. Therefore, many swordsmen left the Heavenly Link Mountain and rushed towards the Heaven's Burial Sword sect at an extremely fast speed. They were afraid that they would fall behind and not be able to get the high-grade spirit stones. They did not know that before this, someone had already recognized Chu Mu's identity from Xiao Qianfeng and quietly left for the Heaven's Burial Sword sect. For more than a year, Chu Mu had spent most of his time comprehending sword intent and had not experienced many battles. However, with his innate talent for battle, he was growing every day. However, because he had not fought for a long time, Chu Mu needed some time to adapt to his current improvement. Therefore, from the 1st floor to the 10th floor, Chu Mu used 15 minutes to pass. This speed was about the same as when he had first challenged the Heavenly Link Sword Pagoda. What's going on? Zhentian Sword Hero, why is Chu Mu's speed so slow? Many swordsmen didn't understand. Following, from the 10th level to the 20th level, Chu Mu also used a quarter of an hour to pass through each level. This speed wasn't fast, but it wasn't slow either. It could only be considered average. Entering the 21st floor, Chu Mu faced 21 powerful virtual swordsmen that seemed to have appeared out of thin air. These virtual swordsmen were the same as Chu Mu. They all had the sword chi of the peak of the Chi High Realm and 30% of sword intent. However, their battle talent was the same as before. Battle talent was directly related to the combination and application of one's strength, as well as the ability to improvise. The same strength in the hands of different people with different battle talents would have a completely different effect. The difference could reach the point where one could easily be killed. The moment the 21 powerful virtual swordsmen appeared, Chu Mu turned into a shadow and flew past them. In an instant, the 21 powerful virtual swordsmen's necks were all cut off by the demon-slaying sword. The swordsmen outside the Heavenly Link Sword Pagoda realized that the 21st floor had just lit up. They estimated that it had only taken 3 breaths of time before it dimmed. This made them extremely shocked. Then, the 22nd floor lit up. How is this possible? This is impossible. Is there a problem with the Heavenly Link Sword Pagoda? Everyone was in disbelief. After all, Chu Mu had used 15 minutes to pass each floor. The 21st floor was even more difficult than the previous ones. Yet, he had passed it in less than 3 breaths of time. Was this a dream? Of course, saying that there was a problem with the Heavenly Link Sword Pagoda was a joke. Since ancient times, the Heavenly Link Sword Pagoda had existed for who knows how many years, and there had never been a problem. Xiao Qianfeng was also very surprised. Previously, he had used close to 15 minutes to pass the 21st floor. Compared to junior brother Chu, the difference was like heaven and earth. Entering the 22nd floor, Chu Mu faced 22 powerful virtual swordsmen. Yet, in a short 10 breaths of time, Chu Mu still killed all of these powerful virtual swordsmen. The 23rd floor was cleared in 30 breaths of time. The 24th floor was cleared in 60 breaths of time. The 25th floor was cleared in 100 breaths of time. The 26th floor was cleared in 150 breaths of time. Floor after floor, Chu Mu's speed was extremely shocking. Even Zhu Wudao's first-rate swordsman couldn't compare to him, because at this point, Chu Mu had already fully grasped the strength that he had gained over the past year. He was able to fully utilize it. His strength was astonishing. Not long after, Chu Mu reached the 30th floor. The difficulty of the 30th floor increased exponentially. Chu Mu used the dual sword arts. Deshang's dual sword arts were fully displayed. The reverse air step combined with chop iron and point kill brought out a terrifying destructive power that was unparalleled. In the past year, most of his time had been spent on resisting and comprehending the sword intent. The sword intent was extremely tough and condensed. It surpassed the sword intent of a normal swordsman. His cultivation base had also reached the peak of the Qi High realm. Therefore, his improvement in other aspects was just barely satisfactory. Up until now, he had only scratched the surface of the reverse air step. But compared to a year ago, he had improved a little. Stepping out of the reverse air step, Chu Mu appeared behind a powerful virtual swordsman. Chop iron and point kill instantly killed 2 virtual swordsmen. About 15 minutes later, Chu Mu had killed the 30th virtual swordsman. He had fully recovered and entered the 31st floor. 31st floor, so powerful! His last record was the 30th floor. In the past year, his strength has increased significantly. Will he surpass Gu Jianghe like last time and be ranked 4th? Right now, Gu Jianghe's highest record was the 31st floor, and he was defeated not long after reaching the 31st floor. Junior apprentice brother can definitely surpass the 4th, and even challenge the top 3. Xiao Qianfeng thought to himself. The more time he spent with Chu Mu, the more he felt that Chu Mu was not ordinary. On the 31st floor, before the virtual swordsman appeared, Chu Mu already felt a huge pressure on his body. Then, 31 figures with powerful qi appeared out of thin air. The horrifying sword intent was extremely sharp. It attacked towards Chu Mu as if it wanted to kill him. With a cold shout, Chu Mu attacked first. With both swords in his hands, he drew a sharp arc of light that cut through the air. The virtual swordsman hurriedly raised his sword to block, but the 2 arcs of light that Chu Mu drew were like illusions. They directly passed through the swords of 2 virtual swordsmen and cut through their necks. Their heads flew, instantly killing 2 virtual swordsmen. The remaining 29 virtual swordsmen reacted instantly and attacked together. Sword light was extremely sharp and engulfed Chu Mu. In that instant of life and death crisis, Chu Mu used the reverse air step. His figure disappeared in an instant, leaving behind only an afterimage that was pierced through by the 29 sword light. Chop iron, 2 more dead. Point kill, 1 more dead. The 31st floor of the Heavenly Sword Pagoda gave Chu Mu too much pressure. He was completely focused, not daring to be distracted in the slightest. In this kind of place, the slightest distraction would result in him being hit. Once he was injured, his overall strength would drop, and he would be easily killed. Kill, kill, kill. Chu Mu continuously used the reverse air step. The infinite desolate sword qi and spiritual energy were greatly consumed. Sweat dripped from his forehead. Of the 31 virtual swordsmen on the 31st floor, more than 20 had already been killed by Chu Mu. Only 3 were left. Chu Mu gritted his teeth and his expression became cold. His eyes flashed with a sharp light as he attacked again. By now, he had used up too much of his infinite desolate sword qi and 70% of his spiritual energy. He could only use the reverse air step a few more times. With a flash, he dodged two sword light. A sword light pierced towards Chu Mu's back. Chu Mu tried his best to move his feet, dodging that sword light. At the same time, he used his two swords to execute chop iron and point kill. With two puchi sounds, under the attacks of slash iron and point kill, two powerful virtual swordsmen were killed by Chu Mu. However, Chu Mu was also stabbed in the back by a sword light from behind. Fortunately, he did his best to dodge and avoid being hit in the vitals, but a large part of his body was still shattered by the terrifying sword light. With a low shout, Chu Mu quickly turned around, his two swords spinning. The last virtual swordsman was cut into 4 halves and disappeared. Intense pain engulfed his entire body. Chu Mu lowered his head to look and saw that the left side of his body was missing a large chunk from his chest to his waist. Even his internal organs had disappeared. If it wasn't for his heavenly desolate sword body's astonishing life force, he probably would have been killed already. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 507. The 31st floor of the Heavenly Sword Tower dimmed, and the 32nd floor lit up. Sword Hero Gentian passed the 31st floor and entered the 32nd floor. A swordsman suddenly laughed. Then, he thought of something and his face changed drastically. His eyes almost popped out of their socket. He was filled with disbelief. Like him, almost all the swordsmen present had the same expression. They didn't dare to believe it. Xiao Qianfeng was also extremely shocked. He didn't expect that junior brother Chu could actually pass the 31st floor and enter the 32nd floor. Even if he was killed just after entering the 32nd floor, it was enough to suppress the others and take first place. The swordsmen at the top of the Heavenly Sword Mountain were all shocked. They fell into a deep silence. Only the sound of heavy breathing could be heard. It was louder and louder, as if a gale was howling. Many swordsmen went from being dumbfounded to flushed red. Their blood vessels looked like they were about to burst. They were really too excited. Hurry, hurry, hurry! Some swordsmen took out message talismans from their spatial bracelets in a flurry and lit them up. At the same time, they said a few words. The content was about the Heavenly Sword Tower. Gentian, Sword Hero Chu Mu, had passed the 32nd floor. Message talismans weren't omnipotent. They needed some time and even 1 or 2 days to reach distant places. Perhaps by the time those sword sects received the news, Chu Mu would have already left. No matter what, the news that someone had passed the 31st floor of the Heavenly Sword Tower and entered the 32nd floor would definitely stir up a huge storm in the Central Sword region and shake the world. Especially when Chu Mu was a swordsman from a remote place in the Eastern Sword region. The shock would be several times greater. Junior brother Chu will definitely become a super expert on the ancient sword continent in the future. Xiao Qianfeng secretly clenched his fist. He was unusually excited. There wasn't the slightest bit of jealousy in his heart. There was only joy and motivation. Sect leader, this damned fella. This time, we must not let him escape. Otherwise, there will be endless trouble in the future. Among the crowd, the sect master of the Heaven-Burying Sword sect, Sword Venerable Heaven-Burying, was leading the 2nd elder, 3rd elder, 4th elder, and 9th elder. They were preparing to capture Xiao Qianfeng and Chu Mu the moment they left the heaven-piercing mountain. Because they had kept a low profile and all the swordsmen's attention was on Chu Mu, no one had noticed their arrival. Yes. No matter how talented he is, he's no match for us now. If the situation changes later, just kill him. There's no need to capture him. Venerable Zongtian sent a message to the 4 elders. When they thought about how Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng would disappear without a trace like last time, making it impossible for them to find them, and how they would return to take revenge after breaking through and becoming stronger, they couldn't help but shudder. If it wasn't for the fact that they were worried about the survival of the entire Heaven Burial Sword sect, they would have directly attacked here and killed Chu Mu and Xiao Qianfeng. Chu Mu didn't know anything about the outside world. Right now, he was facing 32 powerful virtual swordsmen, and he was under great pressure. Just like before, Chu Mu took the initiative to attack the moment the 32 powerful virtual swordsmen appeared and killed 2 of them. However, after that, the 30 powerful virtual swordsmen were extremely terrifying. After a fierce battle, Chu Mu still couldn't kill a single one of them. The 30 sword light were extremely sharp. They seemed indeterminate, but in fact, all of them were locked onto Chu Mu. Even if Chu Mu used the inverse space step, it was still very difficult for him to dodge. With a p sound, his sleeves were torn apart by a sword light, revealing his arms. While Chu Mu was constantly dodging, he also used his 2 swords to block again and again. He might be able to kill several powerful virtual swordsmen at once by using the Moon Slashing Sword, but the consequence was that he would be besieged by sword skills as powerful as the Moon Slashing Sword and instantly shattered. Chu Mu's eyes were filled with endless sword light. Every single one of them could kill him. Facing the powerful pressure, Chu Mu once again entered the ethereal state. Everything around him was clearly perceived by him. Although the Flying Swan Illusory Steps still had the same name, it had already surpassed the original Flying Swan Illusory Steps in essence. It had become even more profound and unpredictable. The perfect state of reality was completely combined with the current Flying Swan Illusory Step. The essence of the state of reality was vividly displayed. Chu Mu blocked a sword light with 1 sword. The other sword pierced through the heart of the virtual swordsman in front of him from an unbelievable angle, killing him. At the same time, Chu Mu couldn't dodge in time. A sword light sliced open his long robe. He was just a hair away from being cut in half at the waist. Without the slightest bit of surprise, Chu Mu's face was as cold as water. He continued to dodge and block, looking for the best opportunity to strike. Time slowly passed. In the blink of an eye, 15 minutes had passed. However, Chu Mu had only killed 4 powerful virtual swordsmen. There were still 28 left. Outside the Heavenly Sword Tower, everyone raised their heads and stared at the 32nd level of the Heavenly Sword Tower. It was as if they had forgotten to breathe. Without a doubt, Chu Mu was definitely in first place. What everyone wanted to know was how long Chu Mu could last on the 32nd level. They even wanted to know if he could pass the 32nd level and enter the 33rd level. Since the inception of the Heavenly Sword Tower, no one had been able to reach the 33rd level. Even the 32nd level was extremely rare. Every one of them would be famous for eternity. The 5th. Chu Mu's forehead was covered in sweat. His eyes were solemn. The 6th. Most of Chu Mu's long robe had been torn apart. The 7th. Chu Mu's face was slightly pale. His breathing began to become chaotic. Logically speaking, the 32nd level only had 1 more virtual swordsman than the 31st level. However, Chu Mu had already killed 2 at the start, so there were only 30 virtual swordsmen left. It was equivalent to the 30th level. Moreover, the combat talent of each virtual swordsman was fixed. There was no improvement. However, for some reason, Chu Mu felt an immense pressure. This pressure was not something he could feel on the 30th or 31st level. It was several times greater than the 31st level. Even now, there were still 25 powerful virtual swordsmen left. They still brought great pressure to Chu Mu. It was greater than the 31st level. This situation made Chu Mu realize that he could forget about passing the 32nd level. However, he still wanted to challenge his limits and see how many powerful virtual swordsmen he could kill. The 8th. Chu Mu's back was injured by a sword light. A wound opened up and blood dripped out. The 9th. Chu Mu's chest was cut by 2 sword lights. The wound was deep and blood spurted out. The 10th. There was another wound on Chu Mu's body. The 11th. Chu Mu's left leg was cut off. Intense pain spread throughout his body, but he still managed to dodge with his extraordinary willpower. The 12th. Chu Mu's left hand was cut off, and only his right hand was left holding the demon-slaying sword. The 13th. A sword light was extremely sharp. It cut through Chu Mu's waist. Chu Mu had no chance to dodge at all. The terrifying pain made Chu Mu's vision turn black. Several sword lights came at him again. Chu Mu knew that he had been cut in half at the waist. There was no way for him to dodge. Next, he would be killed by these sword lights. Before he died, he had to drag a few more down with him. Murderous intent exploded in his eyes. Chu Mu's sword slashed out even faster. A 10-meter-long dark golden crescent moon pierced through the air. The crescent moon instantly shattered the sword light. Immediately after, it killed the 5 virtual swordsmen that couldn't dodge in time. In the next moment, when Chu Mu's vision became blurry, he could only vaguely see over a dozen dazzling sword lights of different colors tearing apart the heavens and earth. They swept towards him from all directions. That aura directly caused Chu Mu's body to collapse. 18. Chu Mu killed a total of 18 powerful virtual swordsmen before he was defeated and sent out of the Heavenly Sword Tower. The ranking of the Heavenly Sword Tower was related to the number of floors. But if they were on the same floor, it was related to the number of virtual swordsmen killed. For example, Zhong Qingtian, Zhu Wudao, Yan Zhiyo, and Gu Jianghe had all reached the 31st floor. But the number of virtual swordsmen they killed was different, which led to the difference in their rankings. Without a doubt, Chu Mu's name shone brightly. He rushed to first place in an instant, pushing Zhong Qingtian down. He reached the top. Chu Mu could clearly feel the changes in his body. It wasn't a change in strength, but in his mind. It seemed to be a sublimation. He felt that his 5 senses were sharper, and his mind power seemed to be more resilient. He didn't know if it was an illusion. On the 32nd floor, I killed 18 powerful virtual swordsmen. This is my limit now. Chu Mu turned back to look at the Heavenly Sword Tower. His eyes became deep and distant. He thought to himself, even if I challenge the Heavenly Sword Tower a few more times, this result won't change. At most, I'll kill another virtual swordsman. That's all. Everything had a limit. No matter how talented a swordsman was, there was still a limit. Even if Chu Mu wasn't at his limit now, he couldn't fully unleash his strength due to his lack of basic strength. Chu Mu was very clear that unless he completely condensed his sword soul, there would be a leap in his strength. When that time came, he would definitely be able to achieve a better result in the Heavenly Sword Tower. But now, Chu Mu was very confident that his result wouldn't be surpassed in a short period of time. As for being surpassed in the future, that was a matter for the future, because he had already broken through. What he wanted was to reach the top, to sublimate his mind and soul and then break through. That was all. Now that he had achieved his goal, it was time to leave. He prepared to find a place to condense his sword soul, and then break through to the 9th transformation realm. He would pass the 9th transformation realm in the shortest time possible and reach the origin realm. He would become an origin realm expert. Thinking of this, Chu Mu couldn't help but feel a little excited. The origin realm was a realm that he had heard of long ago. Now, he was finally about to break through to the origin realm. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 508. Junior Brother Chu. Xiao Qianfeng said and gave him a thumbs up. Senior brother, it seems like we're being watched. Chu Mu smiled. As soon as he left the Heavenly Sword Pagoda and appeared here, he felt a few malicious gazes locking onto him. Burying Heaven's Sword Sect. Xiao Qianfeng smiled coldly. Junior brother, I still have one chance to return to the lifeless sword path inheritance ground. I'm preparing to pass the 9th transformation realm there and come out after reaching the origin realm. Don't worry, senior brother. I also have my own place to go. Let's meet here after we reach the origin realm, Chumu said. Xiao Qianfeng nodded and a gray sword token appeared in his hand. He crushed the gray sword token, and a gray airflow swept out like a curtain of water covering his body. In the next moment, Xiao Qianfeng was compressed into a gray light spot and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Damn it, why did Xiao Qianfeng suddenly disappear? Venerable Zhang Tian and the 4 elders of the Burying Heaven Sword sect were stunned and furious. Get ready. Chumu can't be allowed to escape. Venerable Zhang Tian's face was extremely gloomy as he stared at Chumu. He was worried that Chumu would suddenly disappear like Xiao Qianfeng. Chumu smiled and walked step by step to the edge of the heavenly sword peak as if he was admiring flowers in his own backyard. As he walked, he attracted the attention of countless people. Venerable Zhang Tian and the 4 elders followed and locked onto Chumu with their powerful auras. If Chumu's sword intent hadn't reached 30%, his legs would have gone weak under the pressure of the other party's aura. Even now, he was under great pressure. Senior Sword of Gojoseon, I'm counting on you this time. Chumu transmitted his voice. All right, the Azura Sword of Gojoseon replied, making Chumu feel at ease. When he reached the edge of the Tongtian Peak, Chumu suddenly turned around and looked at Venerable Zhang Tian and the 4 elders with a strange smile on his face. Gentlemen, you don't have to see me off. I'll pay a visit to the Buried Heaven Sword sect in the future. As soon as he finished speaking, a pair of sword chi wings appeared on Chumu's back. Using a secret technique, he soared into the sky. With a whoosh, he traveled 1,000 meters in one breath. Chase! Venerable Zhang Tian and the 4 Origin Realm Elders all roared and accelerated at full speed. Boom, 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 countless shattered rocks were sent flying. 5 more holes appeared on Tongtian Mountain. The 5 of them turned into 5 streams of light and chased after Chumu at supersonic speed. Venerable Zhang Tian possessed the strength of an ordinary sword venerable. The other 4 elders, with the exception of the 9th elder, all had profound cultivation bases. Their speed was unbelievably fast, even faster than Chumu's soaring into the sky secret technique. In just 3 breaths' time, Venerable Zhang Tian had already caught up with Chumu. He stretched his hand forward, and a huge sword chi condensed from sword chi whizzed from behind. The majestic and sharp aura firmly locked onto Chumu like a mountain. The heavy pressure on Chumu caused his body to sink and his speed to drop by more than half. In the blink of an eye, Venerable Zhang Tian's sword origin hand had already covered Chumu. His 5 fingers were rapidly closing. In just 1/100th of a second, the sword origin hand would capture Chumu and turn him into a prisoner. Suddenly, with a loud bang, an incomparably terrifying aura burst out from Chumu's body and shattered the sword chi hand. In the blink of an eye, Chumu seemed to have turned into a burning meteor. He shot forward at a speed dozens of times faster than before. In just 3 breaths' time, he disappeared from Venerable Zhang Tian's sight. What's going on? Venerable Zhang Tian stopped and floated in the air. His face was extremely gloomy as he stared at the direction where Chumu disappeared. He was extremely puzzled. He was just a peak chi high swordsman. How could he burst out such a powerful aura in an instant? It even made Venerable Zhang Tian tremble. The 4 elders quickly caught up with him from behind. Sect Master, what's going on? Sect Master, where is he? He escaped, Venerable Zhang Tian said gloomily. Escaped? How could that be? He's just a chi high swordsman. How could he escape? Elder Ju screamed in disbelief. Immediately, he felt a chill run down his spine. Cold sweat dripped down from his forehead as he waved his hand and explained, Sect Master, that's not what I meant. I meant that this Chumu is just a chi high swordsman. Could it be that he has some special skills? Humph. Venerable Zhang Tian glanced at Elder Ju coldly and left without saying a word. Elder Ju wiped off his cold sweat. Venerable Zhang Tian was temperamental and hated it when people questioned him. Let's go. The other three elders' faces were also not looking good. This time, they failed to stop Xiao Qianfeng and Chu Mu. The next time they meet them, it would most likely be when they break through to the Origin Realm. For geniuses like them, once they break through to the Origin Realm, their strength would definitely increase by tens or even hundreds of times. With their sword origin cultivation, they would definitely be able to fight against a normal Origin Realm swordsman or even a Deshang swordsman. If they were given more time, it would not be impossible for them to have the strength of a sword revered. At that time, it would be the end of the Buried Heaven Sword sect. The elders' minds started to become active as they prepared their future plans. After shaking off Venerable Zhang Tian, Chu Mu's speed finally slowed down. The lightning-fast speed just now made his blood boil and his face turn red from excitement. Senior Sword of Gojoseon, thank you for your help. After a few breaths, Chu Mu calmed down and said, From the moment you decided to go to the Heavenly Sword Tower, you must have thought of the consequences. The Azura Sword of Gojoseon said lightly. Senior is still the most thorough. Chu Mu admitted with a laugh after his thoughts were seen through. Find a secret place and prepare to condense the sword soul. The Azura Sword of Gojoseon said indifferently. One day later, Chu Mu once again occupied the cave of a mid-level super-rank demonic beast. As for that demonic beast, it naturally became a dead soul under Chu Mu's sword. This time, because it was extremely important to condense the sword soul, Chu Mu did his best to perfect the preliminary work. The entrance of the cave was sealed with rocks one after another. Even the passage was sealed with rock. In order to prevent any accidents, the Azura Sword of Gojoseon even left a sword intent on the rocks that sealed the entrance. Even a sword of Gojoseon wouldn't be able to break through, unless one had the strength of the Sword of Gojoseon. The Sword of Gojoseon wasn't a cabbage that could be found anywhere. Every sword of Gojoseon wasn't young and most of the time, they were in closed-door cultivation to comprehend the Sword Tao. Alright, now, take out 36 supreme-grade spiritual stones and the Sword Soul spiritual root. In the dry cave, the Azura Sword of Gojoseon said. The value of supreme-grade spiritual stones was much higher than that of high-grade spiritual stones. Even with Chu Mu's wealth that far exceeded that of an ordinary sword of Gojoseon, he could only take out 40 of them. Fortunately, the Azura Sword of Gojoseon only asked for 36. As soon as the 36 supreme-grade spiritual stones appeared, the Azura Sword of Gojoseon gently pointed its finger. One by one, the spiritual stones shot out and embedded themselves into the dry cave floor. Chu Mu discovered that the 36 supreme-grade spiritual stones were embedded in a very orderly manner. There was a special fluctuation contained within. The ancient technique that I obtained to condense a sword soul is called the Heaven Spirit Condensing Art. It requires 36 spiritual stones as the foundation. In ancient times, it used king-grade spiritual stones. However, I'm only a soul right now and can't take out any king-grade spiritual stones. You don't have any either, so I modified it to use supreme-grade spiritual stones. The Azura Sword King explained, with 36 supreme-grade spirit stones as the foundation, the Sword Soul Root as the primer, and the Heavenly Dipper Soul Condensation Great Art. The Sword Soul Condensation Art will combine the soul in one's soul with the sword intent to condense the sword soul. Now, I'll impart the Heaven Spirit Condensing Art to you. You can try it out first. With your perception, it won't take long for you to grasp it. As the Azura Sword of Gojoseon spoke, it pointed its finger at Chu Mu's forehead. Chu Mu could only feel pieces of information beginning to appear in his mind. He read the information and began to focus on comprehending the Heaven Spirit Condensing Art from ancient times. The Big Dipper soul congealing technique was extremely intricate. With Chu Mu's perception, it was impossible for him to comprehend it in a short period of time. After a full 2 hours, Chu Mu finally comprehended the Big Dipper soul congealing technique and understood how to use it. What a wonderful secret art! Chu Mu exclaimed. It turned out that when one's sword intent was not complete, to condense a sword soul, one must have the help of others. Moreover, the helper must already have a sword soul. Understanding this point, Chu Mu understood that if he wanted to successfully condense a sword soul, it was impossible to rely on him alone. He also needed the help of the Azura sword of Gojoseon. Since you have fully comprehended the heaven spirit condensing art, now, adjust your state to the peak and then begin to condense a sword soul. The Azura sword of Gojoseon said. Okay. Nodding, Chu Mu closed his eyes and adjusted his breathing, allowing his essence, energy, and spirit to reach the peak. After a quarter of an hour, Chu Mu finished adjusting his breathing and nodded to the Azura sword of Gojoseon. Rise. With a low shout, the Azura sword of Gojoseon instantly flicked out a sword essence. The sword essence split into 36 rays and hit the 36 top-grade spirit stones. In an instant, the 36 top-grade spirit stones released a strong light, rushed into the sky, and gathered above Chu Mu's head, circling. Fall. The Azura sword of Gojoseon shouted again, one finger swiping down, and the light above Chu Mu's head shot down and instantly disappeared into the top of Chu Mu's head. Chu Mu's body shook, and an indescribable feeling spread throughout his body. Then, he felt as if his body had disappeared, leaving only his soul and sword intent. The heaven spirit condensing art mentioned this situation. Chu Mu immediately mobilized his spiritual force and operated it in the same way as the heaven spirit condensing art. His spiritual force merged with the falling light, and Chu Mu controlled the light to quickly swim in his spiritual world, beginning to swallow the 30% sword intent. This process was not difficult, but it would take some time. After a while, the 30% sword intent was completely swallowed by the light and merged with it. The Azura sword of Gojoseon stared at Chu Mu, as if he could see everything that was happening in Chu Mu's spiritual world. Subsequently, he picked up the sword soul spiritual root that he had placed at the side and pointed at it. As he drew it out, a gray shadow was drawn out from the sword soul spiritual root. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 509. Inside the dry cave, the bright light illuminated the dark cave. After the Shura sword of Gojoseon drew out the gray shadow from the middle-grade sword soul spiritual root, it shot toward Chu Mu. In the blink of an eye, it shot into Chu Mu's glabella and disappeared. In Chu Mu's spiritual world, a gray shadow appeared and quickly wandered around in the spiritual world. This gray shadow constantly emitted a kind of soul-like fluctuation with pure sword intent. Chu Mu immediately knew that it was the power of the sword soul spiritual root. Without the slightest panic, Chu Mu controlled the light in his spiritual world according to the celestial spirit consolidation technique and quickly chased after the gray shadow. The gray shadow was extremely fast and agile, but this was Chu Mu's spiritual world. In a few moments, Chu Mu's consciousness controlled the light to catch up with the gray shadow and swallowed it as if it was swallowing the sword intent. The Shura sword of Gojoseon seemed to be able to feel the changes in Chu Mu's spiritual world. A faint smile appeared on its serious face as it said, "I can only help you up to this point. The condensation of the sword's soul will depend on you from now on." Chu Mu did not hear the Shura sword of Gojoseon's words, but he also knew that he had to rely on himself from now on. The Shura sword of Gojoseon's assistance to him had ended. Condense! A fierce shout sounded in his mind. Chu Mu's consciousness was extremely condensed as he controlled the spiritual world to turn into a gray light and began to compress. This was the most important step in the condensation of the sword soul. Everything before was in preparation for this step. This step could not be helped by outsiders. He could only rely on himself to complete it with the strong spiritual power and will brought by his strong soul. Not daring to relax, Chu Mu's spiritual power was like a rope stretched to the limit and could break at any time. Condensing the sword's soul before the sword intent was complete was like walking on a tightrope on a cliff. The slightest mistake would cause him to fall off the cliff and die without a burial place. However, the Shura sword of Gojoseon did not have the slightest bit of worry on its face. Instead, it revealed a faint smile and was very confident in Chu Mu. Chu Mu's growth was all seen by the Shura sword of Gojoseon. Apart from Chu Mu himself, only the Shura sword of Gojoseon knew his talent, spirit, and will. Even things that Chu Mu himself did not know, the Shura sword of Gojoseon was clear to him. Of Gojoseon's, success rate of Gojoseon's, success of Gojoseon's, of Gojoseph. If he couldn't even condense a sword soul with an 80% success rate, he might as well go home and plant sweet potatoes. Gagagals of Gol. In his spiritual world, Chu Mu let out explosive roars. Every roar was like a thunderclap, rumbling with shocking power. Under his strong spiritual power and fearsome will, the grayish-white light was compressed bit by bit. The smaller it was, the more difficult it was to compress it. Green veins protruded on Chu Mu's forehead like squirming earthworms, looking unusually ferocious. In his spiritual world, the grayish-white light had been compressed to the limit by Chu Mu, and it could not be compressed any further. With the first step completed, the second step, which was also the last step, was about to begin. All of a sudden, Chu Mu felt powerless. He knew that this powerlessness was because he had consumed too much of his spiritual power, but he dared not relax at all. Instead, he kept strengthening it. He clenched his teeth so hard that blood seeped out from the gaps between his teeth, and a bloody smell spread in his mouth. The second step was to compress and sculpt the grayish-white light into the shape of a sword. As time passed, more and more green veins appeared on Chu Mu's face. He was dripping with sweat, and his robe was almost soaked. However, Chu Mu did not feel anything. All of his spiritual power and will were used to condense the sword's soul. It should be done soon. The Azura sword of Gojoseon muttered to himself. Condense. After 3 breaths, Chu Mu roared. In his spiritual world, the grayish-white light, which already had the shape of a sword, was instantly compressed by a huge force as if it was being hammered by a huge hammer. The last step. With a boom, Chu Mu felt a terrifying sound explode from the grayish-white sword-shaped light. It was as if thunder had exploded in his spiritual world at the beginning of the world. It shattered Chu Mu's will and instantly became chaotic and unconscious. It was as if his spiritual world had also shattered. It was as long as thousands of years, as if he had slept for countless years. Chu Mu's will once again condensed. When he regained his consciousness, he was immediately shocked. His spiritual world had actually more than doubled in size and became even wider. The size of one's spiritual world was clearly related to the strength of one's spiritual power. Doubling the size of one's spiritual world meant that Chu Mu's spiritual power had more than doubled. In the center of his spiritual world, there was a strange sword floating. This sword was pale white and almost transparent. It did not seem to have a hilt, only a part of the sword. A cold light, like lightning, was rapidly moving around on the sword, emitting an astonishingly sharp aura. Chu Mu was overjoyed. He knew that this was the so-called sword soul. That cold light, like lightning, was his 30% sword intent. In addition to the sword soul, there was a dark golden light, like a sharp sword, moving around on the left. It had an astonishingly sharp aura, which was the concept of tearing. On the right there was a cloud-like thing, which was unpredictable, which was the concept of illusion and reality. There was also a meteorite-like sword essence, which was also floating in the spiritual world. When his consciousness returned to his body, Chu Mu felt the sweet taste in his mouth and the feeling of his robe being soaked in sweat. He directly ignored this uncomfortable feeling, because he felt that the outside world had become different. There were no words to describe this feeling. It was as if he had come into contact with a higher level of knowledge and understood more mysteries. He also had a strange feeling. It was as if there was a fundamental difference between the current 30% sword intent and the previous 30% sword intent. It was as if the 30% sword intent now could easily defeat the 30% sword intent before. It was like comparing a building with a solid foundation to a building without a solid foundation. Not bad. Your sword soul has been condensed. The Shura sword of Gojoseon's face revealed a slight smile. However, this is only the embryonic form of the sword soul. It is not the real sword soul yet. Embryonic form of the sword soul? Chumu was stunned. That's right. The sword of Gojoseon is the symbol of the sword of Gojoseon. It is not that easy to obtain. However, you now have the embryonic form of the sword soul. As long as your sword intent continues to improve, until it is complete, and when your realm reaches the God-condensing realm, you will be able to obtain the real sword soul and become a sword of Gojoseon in one fell swoop. The Shura sword of Gojoseon explained. I see. Chumu thought for a bit and understood. Although it was not the real sword soul, and was only the embryonic form of the sword soul, it was already very good. Compared to the other genius swordsmen, Chumu was already a big step ahead of them. The so-called God-condensing realm was the name of a swordsman's cultivation realm. The realm after the origin realm was the God-condensing realm. When a swordsman reached the later stages of his cultivation, every step of improvement would become very difficult. Especially when it came to advancing between major realms, it was even more difficult. The difference in strength between each minor realm was very obvious. Since ancient times, countless swordsmen at the peak of the complete origin realm were unable to break through to the God-condensing realm in their entire lives, and died of depression at the end of their lives. The fact that Chumu was able to obtain the embryonic form of the sword's soul meant that as long as his cultivation level was high enough, he would be able to break through to the God-condensing realm and become a sword of Gojoseon. Suddenly enlightened, Chumu laughed heartily. Now that you have the embryonic form of the sword's soul, your sword intent is no longer a rootless duckweed. The power of a 30% sword intent is completely comparable to a 40% sword intent of a swordsman without the embryonic form of the sword's soul. Moreover, because of the embryonic form of the sword's soul, even if you don't use sword chi, you will still be able to display the power of sword intent. You will also be able to use sword intent to display the power of sword chi, exploding the power of conception and the power of the seismic energy at the same time. The Shura sword of Gojoseon explained. Chumu's eyes suddenly lit up. Sword chi was an extremely important foundation for a swordsman. All the power of sword intent and conception had to be supported by sword chi. Otherwise, without sword chi, the power of sword intent and conception would be limited. Being able to display 50% of their power was already very good. Now that he had the embryonic form of the sword's soul, he could avoid this situation. This meant that Chumu's strength had not decreased at all. Instead, it had increased quite a bit compared to before. It was no wonder that the true genius swordsmen in the ancient times did not need to go into seclusion after breaking through to the 9th transformation realm. Instead, they would travel outside. With the embryonic form of the sword's soul and other means, even if they encountered an origin realm swordsman, they would still be able to escape. Now that you have successfully condensed the embryonic form of the sword's soul, your accumulation has reached its limit. If you continue to delay, it will only be a waste of time. Why don't you break through to the 9th transformation realm right here and then leave according to your previous plan? The Shura sword of Gojoseon suggested. Alright. Chumu thought for a while and nodded. The Shura sword of Gojoseon went back into the small dark red sword. Chumu took out a set of dry clothes and quickly changed into them. He threw the clothes that were soaked in sweat to the side, and after moving a little, he sat down cross-legged again. Breaking through to the 9th transformation realm from the peak of the Chi High realm could be said to be difficult, but it could also be said to be easy. The key was accumulation. If one did not have enough accumulation, they could still break through. However, it would take more time and more pain. If one had enough accumulation, breaking through would be a matter of course. Chu Mu moved the sky desolation sword Chi again and again. After one full cycle after another, the 99th full cycle was completed. The 100th full cycle began. When the 100th full cycle began, a thunderous sound came from within Chu Mu's body. It was as if 10,000 thunders were descending. After the 100th full cycle was completed, the sky desolation sword Chi paused as if it was frozen. Following that, a loud sound that was as loud as the mountains collapsing and the earth cracking could be heard. A mighty power surged through Chu Mu's body. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 510. The Tianfeng region belonged to the Quicksand Prefecture. It was very far from the Tongtian mountain, and was 3 prefectures away. The Tianfeng region was a very prosperous region. It was 10 times more prosperous than the Tianhe region, and its area was also a few times bigger than the Tianhe region. This was because in the north of the Tianfeng region, there was a dangerous place in the central sword region, the Wind and Fire Desert. The Wind and Fire Desert was a place where many swordsmen went to train, and the Tianfeng region was a place they had to pass through. There were a lot of people coming and going, which led to the development of the Tianfeng region. At this time, the sky had just brightened, and most of the shops in the Tianfeng region were not open yet. There was a small shop with a big flag with the word Chu written in red on it. There was a line of people waiting for the shop to open like a long snake. Although there were a lot of people in the Tianfeng region, it was rare to see people waiting in line. This attracted a lot of people's attention. Go and ask what is going on. A young man in white said. Yes, young master. A middle-aged man dressed like a guard walked towards the line of people and grabbed one of them by the collar. He asked fiercely, Kid, what is going on here? Why are there so many people waiting in line? The person who was grabbed was a young man who was only at the Chi High realm. He was about to get angry, but when he saw the ferocious face of the guard and the frightening Chi he was releasing, he immediately put on a smile and explained, We are all waiting to buy swords made by Master Chu. Swords made by Master Chu? Is this Master Chu a master swordsmith? The middle-aged guard's ferocious face showed some curiosity. I don't know if Master Chu is a master swordsmith or not, but I know that the swords made by Master Chu are of a higher quality, sharper, and more powerful than normal swords. The young man continued to explain. Also, the price is not expensive. It is about the same as normal swords, so many people want to buy Master Chu's swords. But Master Chu only makes 100 swords a day. Once they are sold out, we have to wait for the next day. So we are here early to wait. Since he's called a master, he's most likely not a grandmaster swordsmith. After the middle-aged sword guard understood the situation, he shook his head in disdain and let go of the young man's collar. Although he was only a sword guard, the power he belonged to was not simple. There were many master swordsmiths and even grandmaster swordsmith. It was not difficult for them to forge swords that were better than ordinary sword. Young master, this place is... The middle-aged sword guard returned to the side of the white-clothed youth and explained the situation to him. However, he didn't finish his sentence because he knew his young master's temperament very well. He didn't like people gossiping and making wild guesses. Oh! The eyes of the young man in white brightened, revealing a hint of curiosity. He ordered, You stay here and buy a sword. Bring it back to the Bao Sword Tower for me to take a look. After giving his instructions, the young man in white immediately left with the other 2 people. Yes. Although the middle-aged sword guard did not agree, He did not dare to show the slightest dissatisfaction. However, he, who thought that his status was higher than others, directly walked to the front and pushed the swordsman who was in the first place down. "Hey, what are you doing? Don't you know how to line up?" The person who was squeezed out was naturally very dissatisfied, and immediately groaned and shouted. "Humph!" The middle-aged sword guard turned around and shouted with a ferocious look, "Line up? How dare you ask me to line up? Do you want to die?" This threat made the swordsman who was talking unconsciously take 2 steps back, feeling that he had shown weakness. His face immediately turned red, and with the fact that there were other people here, his courage was boosted. "That's right, line up. Every one of us who came here has to consciously line up. You came later than us, but you want to take the first place? This is absolutely unacceptable. Line up, you have to line up. Line up, line up. If you don't want to line up, then get lost." This middle-aged sword guard had the cultivation of the origin realm Deshang, and his strength was tyrannical. Right now, facing the angry accusations of dozens of people, he was not the least bit afraid. Instead, his face turned gloomy, and his eyes flashed with a dangerous light. He shouted, "Whoever dares to shout again, I will kill them." A frightening evil chi burst out from his body like a storm, sweeping across dozens of people, making them feel cold all over. Waves of coldness rushed from the end of their spines to their heads, and they were drenched in cold sweat. After being hit by this powerful and frightening evil chi, these people did not dare to say anything, and could only obediently line up at the back. Right at this moment, the door of the small shop opened, and a young man in his 20s glanced at the people waiting outside with a calm expression. A year ago, he was taken in as a waiter by Master Chu. When he first saw this scene, he was very shocked, but now, he was used to it. If he did not see this kind of scene when he opened the shop one day, he would be surprised. "Kid, pick a good royal sword for me right now," the middle-aged sword guard shouted arrogantly. "Sorry, sir, this shop does not sell royal swords." The young man was startled at first, but then he replied in a neither servile nor overbearing manner, "The swords sold in this shop are mainly the top upper swords and the top supreme swords. Without a royal grade sword, it is indeed an insignificant store." The middle-aged sword guard sneered. He had already guessed that this shop did not have any royal swords. The reason why he said that was completely intentional, because that was his personality. "Give me one of the top supreme swords you guys call here." The waiter's face immediately showed a hint of anger. He respected Master Chu a lot. The reason why he was able to reach the peak of the Chi High Realm was all because of Master Chu's guidance. He also had a top-quality sword that was given to him by Master Chu. It was much sharper than other top-quality swords, and it could easily cut through normal top-quality swords like cutting vegetables. The swords sold in the shop were all personally forged by Master Chu. However, he was very clear that the top swords here couldn't be compared to the one that Master Chu had gifted him. It could be said that the top swords here were only made by Master Chu for practice. Even if they were made for practice, they were not inferior to the top swords in the outside world. This made him respect Master Chu even more, and he would not allow anyone to question or mock him. "The swords in this shop are not sold to people who are blind," the waiter said angrily. "What did you say? How dare you say that I am blind? Do you want to die?" The middle-aged sword guard stared at the waiter fiercely. His murderous aura swept out like a tidal wave. The waiter could not withstand it and was sent flying backwards. Blood spurted out of his mouth as he landed heavily on the ground. The people behind him saw this and were shocked. Who would dare to fight here? The middle-aged sword guard acted as if he had just done something insignificant. He coldly glanced at the waiter who was lying on the ground and spurting out blood. He raised his hand and grabbed in the air. A top supreme sword flew up and was about to land in his hand. Suddenly, the middle-aged sword guard felt that the light in front of him dimmed and then returned to normal. It seemed like an illusion, but he did not know when, but a figure appeared beside the waiter who was lying on the ground and reached out his hand to grab the top supreme swords. Master Chu. Master Chu has come out. Get lost. A low shout came out like thunder, and the middle-aged sword guard's face changed. He looked over with a gloomy face. He saw that the light around the figure had dimmed, as if it was being sucked in. With his eyesight, he could not see clearly at a distance of a few meters, but he could still see that it was a young man around 25 or 26 years old, wearing a white robe. Master Chu? He is so young, but with just one shout I could feel the mental pressure. The middle-aged sword guard was shocked. He felt that he could not see through this young man. He did not seem to be at the Qi High realm, nor the Origin realm. Instead, he seemed to be at the 9th Transformation realm. But on second thought, how could a 9th Revolution realm swordsman appear so brazenly in the outside world and even open a small shop? According to what he knew, which 9th Revolution realm swordsmen did not find a secret place to enter seclusion until they broke through or could not break through anymore. Although he knew his place, the young man in front of him was too mysterious. He could not see through him. His face kept changing, and he did not dare to make a move. He turned around and was about to leave. Stop! A cold shout came again. You injured my waiter. Without enough compensation, do you still think you can leave safely? This voice was extremely sharp and overbearing. A terrifying mental pressure came, and waves of impact made the middle-aged sword guard feel even more pressured. Although he wanted to pull out his sword, he suppressed this impulse. Otherwise, once a fight broke out, it might cause a huge impact and anger the young master. At that time, the loss would outweigh the gain. Understanding this point, the middle-aged sword guard took out a jade bottle from his spatial bracelet and threw it out. There are 10 great revitalizing pellets in here. It should be enough compensation. Also, give me a top-quality sword. The great revitalizing pellet was famous. It was a very precious healing pellet. It had an outstanding effect on both internal and external injuries. It was worth a lot. 10 great revitalizing pellets were worth more than a top-quality sword. Master Chu did not stop him from taking away a top-quality sword. 10 great revitalizing pellets were indeed enough. Adding on some other factors, it would be best if he did not make a move to avoid unnecessary trouble. He took out a great revitalizing pellet and gave it to the waiter. After 15 minutes, the waiter's face returned to normal. Although his injuries were not completely healed, they were no longer a problem. Thank you, master. The waiter quickly bowed. Let's start the sale. Grandmaster Chu nodded and left behind a sentence. In the next breath, his silhouette flickered and disappeared. It was difficult for people to detect how he left. In fact, no one could clearly see Grandmaster Chu's face. They could only vaguely see his face. The waiter wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He was excited. He slammed the table and shouted, Now, we will start the sale of the top-quality sword made by Master Chu. As soon as he finished speaking, those people immediately rushed up. However, they were not in a mess. They all lined up according to the previous line. They all knew that they did not have the ability to cause trouble here. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 511. The Chuji store was divided into 3 sections. One was the store, one was the resting area, and the last one was the sword forging area. At this moment, Master Chu was in the 3rd section. He was holding a black iron hammer that weighed 100 pounds. He was slowly hammering on the red-hot iron, gradually forming the shape of a sword. If there was a Grandmaster swordsmith present and carefully observed, he would discover that every time Grandmaster Chu's hammer landed on the sword embryo, there would be a strange vibration power. The moment the black iron hammer touched the sword embryo, the vibration power would instantly vibrate tens of thousands of times, continuously tempering the sword embryo and making it more condensed bit by bit. At the same time, when the vibration force was applied to the sword, the strong vibration force would remove the impurities on the sword and improve the quality of the sword. Sky Shaking Yuan Sword Forging Art. The essence of this sword forging art was vibration and fusion. This person was Chu Mu, who had disappeared for a year. A year ago, Chu Mu had condensed the sword soul prototype with the help of the Azura sword of Gojoseon. Then, he broke through the Qi High realm and reached the first revolution of the ninth revolution realm. At the same time, Chu Mu's lacerating mentality and illusionary mentality also broke through, becoming the lacerating profound and the illusionary profound. Although the Sky Baron sword Qi was sealed in his body and could not be used at will, Chu Mu's strength had increased a lot. With the 30% sword intent from the sword soul prototype and the power of the profound, coupled with his body that was not inferior to an astral realm swordsman, it was enough to kill a normal astral realm swordsman. Because he could not use the sword Qi, Chu Mu left the cave on foot. He walked as if he was flying. In a few days, he had entered the Tianfeng County. Finally, he bought a small store that could not operate anymore and opened a sword forging shop. He began to study the Sky Shaking Yuan sword forging art. Of course, Chu Mu didn't give up on his cultivation while studying the Sky Quake Fusion sword forging technique. Chu Mu began to cultivate the 9 Revolutions body tempering chapter of the Heavenly Desolate Sword Codex. He tempered the first level of the Heavenly Desolate Sword body, causing the Heavenly Desolate Sword body to improve bit by bit. Because of his deep accumulation, Chu Mu cultivated the 9 Revolutions body tempering very quickly. Not long after, he broke through to the second revolution of the 9 Revolutions realm, causing the strength of his body to increase again. Today, after a year, Chu Mu had reached the 7th turn of the 9 turns refining technique, which was the 7th turn of the 9 turns realm. The strength of the Tianhuang sword body was 7 times stronger than before. It was more than 7 times stronger than an ordinary origin realm swordsman. It was extremely terrifying. Combined with sword intent and ultimacy, it would not be too difficult for him to kill an ordinary origin realm swordsman. Speaking of Chu Mu's improvement in the past year, other than reaching the 7th turn of the 9 turns realm, Chu Mu had also increased his comprehension of the lacerating ultimacy and illusory ultimacy to 20%, which was the entry level. Once he reached 40%, he would have reached the initial level. At that time, his power would increase greatly. However, ultimacy was much more powerful than mental state. It was at least 10 times more difficult to comprehend. Even with Chu Mu's increased comprehension due to his breakthrough and the strength of his soul, he had only managed to increase his comprehension of these 2 ultimacies to 20% in the past year. It should be known that many swordsmen would not be able to reach 20% of their ultimacy after breaking through to the origin realm. The difference between their comprehension and Chu Mu's was like heaven and earth. With the improvement of his ultimacy, his sword intent would naturally not fall behind. A year ago, Chu Mu's sword intent was only at 30%. Now, a year later, Chu Mu's sword intent had reached 40%, and the embryonic form of the sword soul in the center of his spiritual world had become more solid. Because of the embryonic form of the sword soul, Chu Mu's 40% sword intent could not unleash the power of an ordinary swordsman's 50% sword intent. With the addition of the 20% of the lacerating ultimacy, the power was unparalleled and terrifying. Many origin realm swordsmen's sword intent had been stuck below 40%, and many origin realm swordsmen's sword intent had been stuck below 50%. People like Chu Mu, who had reached this level of comprehension when he was still in the 9 turns realm, were too few. Even geniuses like Zhu Wudao and Yan Jiao might not be able to reach this level. Of course, even if their comprehension was not as good as Chu Mu's, they still had powerful sects to rely on, providing them with all kinds of resources and conveniences. This allowed them to improve at an extremely fast speed, surpassing ordinary swordsmen by countless times. The improvement of his body, sword intent, and ultimacy was indeed gratifying. However, there was another improvement that made Chu Mu extremely happy. It was the breakthrough of his vibration force. The Zhen Tian school's Zhen Tian energy had 5 levels: basic vibration force, stone shaking force, mountain shaking force, earth shaking force, and Zhen Tian energy. 3 months ago, Chu Mu had broken through the stone shaking force with the help of the sky shaking energy fusion sword forging technique. He had successfully reached the 3rd level, mountain shaking force. It was not an exaggeration to say that the stone shaking force could shatter rock. As for mountain shaking force, Chu Mu did not know if it had the power to shatter mountains. Perhaps it did not, but since it was called mountain shaking force, it could at least shatter some small hills. In theory, the power of mountain shaking force was on the same level as that of ultimacy. However, the way it was displayed was different. There was a huge difference. They belonged to completely different systems. There was no comparison between the two. Chu Mu had also thought that there were 5 levels of Zhen Tian energy. If the level of mountain shaking force was equivalent to ultimacy, then what about earth shaking force? What level of power was it equivalent to? What was above ultimacy? Chu Mu did not know. Moreover, after earth shaking force, there was Zhen Tian energy, which was more advanced and more terrifying. What made Chu Mu feel regretful was that the air-penetrating force was still at the 2nd level, which was the level of stone-penetrating force. He had not broken through yet. The heaven-shaking energy was, after all, the essence of the heaven-shaking flow. Although it had already been lost, it could still be seen from the words in a few damaged ancient texts. Adding on the fact that his realm was constantly increasing and he had used it many times, Chu Mu had evidence to back it up. Bit by bit, he finally deduced the 3rd level of the mountain shaking energy and broke through. As for the air-penetrating force, it could be said that Chu Mu had deduced it from the beginning. Even the stone-penetrating force was a technique that he had deduced with reference to stone-shaking force. If he wanted to deduce the next level of mountain-penetrating force, it would be even more difficult and would take a longer time. Even if he was anxious, he couldn't rush it. Chu Mu could only comprehend a little bit every day. His schedule was packed to the brim and he didn't have any time to sleep. His resting room was only used to cultivate the 9-revolution body tempering technique. As for the 6 types of concepts that he had comprehended in the Eastern Saint Subpalace, they had also improved because he had broken through to the 9th transformation realm. 4 of them had improved to 90%. As long as Chu Mu was willing to spend some time, he would definitely be able to improve them to perfection and then break through to the profoundness. However, that would definitely distract Chu Mu and take up a lot of his time. Perhaps in the future Chu Mu would do that, but right now, he did not have such thoughts. However, because he had spent a lot of time beside the furnace to forge the sword, Chu Mu had used the fire concept to help the fire, causing the temperature of the fire to be higher and more vigorous. It was also easier to control. Therefore, even if he did not deliberately comprehend it, he had already broken through to the profoundness of fire and reached 10%. In addition, there was also the water concept. Because he needed to temper the water when forging the sword, he could use the water concept to control the water and achieve a better tempering effect. Therefore, he did not deliberately comprehend the water concept and reach 10% of the profoundness of water, which was on par with the profoundness of fire. Lastly, there was the advancement of the Skyquake sword forging art. This sword forging art was not complete. It only had the part to forge royal-grade swords. The rest should be in the O clan of the central sword domain. And now, after a year, Chu Mu had studied the Skyquake sword forging art to the Grandmaster level. Moreover, he had also reached the pinnacle of the Grandmaster level. He was only 1 step away from becoming a Grandmaster blacksmith who could forge royal-grade swords. However, this step was like a heavenly moat that obstructed him. Even after a month, he was still unable to break through. The swords created by Chu-mu, who was a sword master, couldn't be compared to the normal swords circulating in the outside world. This was because the heavenly shaking fusion sword forging technique was a very profound sword forging technique, and there was a clear difference between it and normal sword forging technique. Moreover, Chu-mu's Zhentian energy had reached the third level, the mountain quaking energy. When used on the skyquake sword forging art, the improvement was even more obvious. If he put his heart into it, he could forge a top-quality sword that was comparable to ordinary royal-grade swords in terms of sharpness and hardness. It might even frighten people to death. Even if many grandmaster blacksmiths put their heart into forging top-quality swords, they would not be able to compare with Chu-mu's. Of course, Chu-mu did not take out this kind of top-quality sword to sell. It was too shocking and could be considered his proudest work. He would not take it out easily. The black iron hammer slowly hammered on the sword embryo. The sword embryo had now taken the shape of a sword. After hammering it a few more times, Chu-mu nodded in satisfaction and began to temper the sword. Sizzling sounds were heard and countless white gas spiraled up. Under the control of the profoundness of water, it did not dissipate. Instead, it continuously condensed in the surroundings and interacted with the water below to temper the sword. After a while, the tempering was completed. Chu-mu pulled out the sword from the water. The sword was 1 meter long but only as wide as a finger. Compared to ordinary swords, it was obviously much narrower. The tip of the sword was incomparably sharp. It did not move, but it seemed to have the sharpness to pierce through the void. This was obviously a strange sword, and its main power was reflected in the thrust. Chu-mu waved his hand and stabbed a few more times. The speed of each stab was as fast as lightning and the sound was extremely soft. The sword light was shockingly condensed, as if it had pierced a few holes in the void in front of it. "That's it for today," Chu-mu muttered to himself. He put this top-quality sword into the space bracelet and turned around to walk out of the sword forging room. He entered the lounge and sat cross-legged to comprehend the sword intent. Outside, the 100 swords were sold out every day. Chu-mu gave all the spirit stones he obtained to the shop assistant to buy the materials he needed to forge the swords. This cycle repeated itself as he continued to forge swords and improve himself. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidien.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 512. What a good sword! Even the 2 masters in the Bao Sword Tower would not be able to forge such a high-quality sword. In a room, the young man in white pulled out the sword. His eyes sparkled as if they were flowing. He lightly tapped the body of the sword, and the melodious sound continued to be heard, as if it came from the heavens. Just by looking at its appearance, this high-quality sword was indeed extraordinary. The eyes of the 2 middle-aged sword guards and the maid beside him lit up. Although they did not know much about swords, ever since they stepped onto the path of a sword artist, they had seen a lot of swords, so they had a good eye for swords. "You said that this Master Chu looks like he is in his 20s? The young man in white turned around and asked one of the middle-aged sword guards. "Young master, that is indeed the case. That Master Chu does not look more than 30 years old, and the feeling he gives me is very strange. It is as if he does not have any cultivation." The middle-aged sword guard thought for a while and replied, "To be able to forge a high-quality sword, he must at least be in the Qi high realm. But I cannot feel any sword Qi from him. There are only 3 possibilities. The first is that his cultivation is higher than mine. The second is that he has some kind of treasure that can cover his body's Qi. The last is that he is in the 9th transformation realm. Go and invite this Master Chu here. Tell him that I am the one who invited him to become a sword forger in the Bao Sword Tower. His position is equivalent to a master." The young man in white put the sword back into the scabbard and placed it on the table beside him. Suddenly, his eyes flashed. "If he is not willing, you know how to deal with him. Yes, young master. The middle-aged sword guard was happy. Originally, he was a little frustrated at the Chu restaurant. But now, with the young master's order, he could do whatever he wanted. If that young master Chu dared to resist, he could teach him a lesson. But what he did not expect was that he could not find Chu Mu at all. Once again, he finished comprehending the sword intent. Although there was no improvement, each comprehension was a kind of accumulation, from quantitative change to qualitative change. As for cultivating the 9 revolutions body tempering technique, it didn't need to be done every day. This was because one tempering session usually took a day. After the tempering session was completed, one could only wait for the next tempering session. According to the situation of a year, it would usually take more than a month. This time interval was extremely short for other 9th Revolution Realm swordsmen because most 9th Revolution Realm swordsmen would have to wait at least a year for the second tempering after the first tempering. Although each tempering would increase the strength of his body and the purity of his sword chi, it was also a burden on his body. This kind of burden could not be removed by human means. It could only be allowed to recover on its own. Some people recovered slowly, while others recovered quickly. The speed of recovery was not only related to one's physique, but also the degree of accumulation. In another half a month, I will be able to undergo the 8th tempering session and enter the 8th revolution, the origin realm. It won't be long. Chu Mu sighed softly and said, in his spiritual world, the meteor sword essence from the great Kuan Sword Mansion's mansion master still existed. It had never been used. The aura it emitted was almost enough to cause Chu Mu's sword soul prototype to collapse. After comprehending the sword intent, Chu Mu began to study the sky-shaking Yuan fusion sword forging technique. The sky-shaking Yuan fusion sword forging technique. Strictly speaking, it can be divided into 2 parts, sky shaking and Yuan fusion. The part 1 obtained is incomplete. Only the sky shaking part was not mentioned in Yuan fusion. According to what I have comprehended in the past year, the so-called Yuan fusion is most likely to inject one's sword chi into the sword embryo when hammering it. It strengthens the sword embryo from the inside out, making it more adaptable and conductive to sword chi. Chu Mu frowned slightly. Unfortunately, I have already completely grasped the sky-shaking part, but I'm still missing the Yuan fusion part. Chu Mu simply sorted out the incomplete sky-shaking Yuan fusion sword forging technique from the beginning. Then, he combined it with his sword forging experience in the past year and carefully pondered over it. The essence of the sky-shaking part of the sky-shaking Yuan fusion sword forging technique was vibration. Chu Mu's vibration power had already reached the 3rd level, the mountain quaking energy. Compared to the real O clan, he was much better in this aspect, at least several times better. This was also why Chu Mu only grasped the sky-shaking part. Under the situation where he lacked the essence of Yuan fusion, he was still able to forge a top-notch supreme-grade sword. However, it was still not enough. For Chu Mu, even forging the most ordinary royal-grade sword would be very difficult, let alone forging a top-notch royal-grade sword like the Sky Desolate sword. Chu Mu understood that he had to solve the Yuan fusion part. He had a premonition that once he solved this part, he might be able to break through the Master Swordsmith level and become a Grandmaster Swordsmith. Then, he would be able to forge a genuine royal-grade sword. However, even if I obtain the Yuan fusion method now, I won't be able to successfully cultivate it because I can't use sword chi right now. As he thought about it, Chu Mu's body suddenly shook. His eyes emitted a terrifying light. I've been thinking too much. He clapped his hands and suddenly stood up. He pushed open the door of the lounge and strode towards the sword forging room. I have 2 special powers, the Zhen Tian energy and the void penetrating energy. The Zhen Tian energy is vibration, and the void penetrating energy is penetration. Since I don't have the Yuan fusion method, I might as well change my way of thinking and replace it with the void penetrating energy. Chu-mu said excitedly as he pushed open the door of the sword forging room. A scorching aura assaulted his face. This was a completely new attempt. If he succeeded, it would mean that Chu-mu had walked his own path in the O family's Skyquake Yuan fusion sword forging technique. Using the profound meaning of fire, the temperature of the flames in the furnace continued to rise to a terrifying degree. The temperature in the sword forging room was already high enough to roast an ordinary person to the point of suffocation. Chu-mu had already taken off his robe and put it away. His upper body was bare, and he was only wearing a pair of shorts. In a short while, the soldering iron had turned red from the heat. This kind of metal was specially used to forge top-grade swords. After all, the higher the quality of the sword, the higher the hardness and toughness. Naturally, the requirements for the materials were also higher. Fortunately, there were many top-grade swords in a place like the central main sword domain. Therefore, the materials used to forge top-grade swords were also very common. There were often shops that specialized in refining metals that sold them. There were even metals used to forge royal-grade sword. Of course, the price was much higher. Chu-mu pulled out the red-hot soldering iron from the raging flames and grabbed the 50-kilogram black iron hammer. He began to try to use the vibration and penetrating energy on the soldering iron at the same time. This was undoubtedly a very difficult technique. The vibration and penetrating energy were two completely different kinds of energy. Chu-mu had never used these two kinds of energy at the same time. Instead, he separated them and created the two ultimate sword skills, iron slash and point kill. Now, because he wanted to make a breakthrough in the sword forging technique, he suddenly had the idea to use these two different kinds of energy at the same time. The first attempt ended in failure. Chu-mu was not discouraged. He knew that this was not an easy task, especially when the two kinds of energy, mountain-quaking energy and rock-penetrating energy, were not equal. It was even more difficult. However, since he had found the direction, he would persevere until he succeeded. On the first day, the soldering iron was hammered out of shape by Chu-mu. He did not succeed in using the mountain-quaking energy and rock-penetrating energy at the same time. On the second day, he told the shop assistant that once the swords in the shop were sold out, he would temporarily close the shop and would inform him when he would reopen. Chu-mu continued to forge and tried to use the two kinds of energy at the same time. He still failed. The third day, the fourth day, the fifth day, Chu-mu failed day after day, but he persevered day after day. His spirit was unprecedentedly focused, as if he had gone mad. He did not have any time to rest at all. He stayed in the sword forging room 24 hours a day. On the sixth day, Chu-mu's eyes were bloodshot, but he was still tirelessly waving the black iron hammer. When he hammered down, Chu-mu was suddenly stunned. This was because he felt that the iron felt under the soldering iron was bombarded by a force, and it instantly shook. This feeling was much stronger and more condensed than the rock-penetrating energy. The rock-penetrating energy has also broken through. Chu-mu did not react for a moment. He did not expect that after working hard for 6 days, the Zhen-Tian energy and space-penetrating energy were not used together. Instead, the rock-penetrating energy had broken through. This should be equivalent to the level of mountain-quaking energy. "Let's name it mountain-quaking energy," Chu-mu said. Temporarily giving up on trying to use the two forces at the same time, Chu-mu tested the power of the mountain-quaking energy. The rock-penetrating energy could only penetrate things that were not very dense, whether it was solid, liquid, or gas. In terms of destructive power, it was far inferior to the rock-quaking energy. It was only superior in terms of strangeness and difficulty to guard against. Naturally, the power of the mountain-quaking energy could not be compared to the mountain-quaking energy. After all, the role of the mountain-quaking energy was purely to destroy, while the role of the mountain-quaking energy was to penetrate. After trying, Chu-mu found that the mountain-quaking energy could penetrate steel, and not ordinary steel. It could easily penetrate the metal used to forge top-grade sword. This was something that the previous rock-penetrating energy could not do. As for the destructive power of the mountain-quaking energy, it was probably equivalent to the rock-quaking energy. Next, Chu Mu still tried to combine the mountain-quaking energy and the mountain-quaking energy together, but he could not do it. He also understood the reason. It was because these two forces were very unique. The use of each force required his full concentration, and the burden on his body was also very obvious. With his current physical strength and mental strength, it was not enough to support the fusion of these two forces. The burden was too great. If he forced the fusion, his body would collapse, and even his mental world would be severely damaged. Since he understood this, Chu Mu no longer forced the fusion of the two forces. Instead, he took a step back and used the mountain-quaking energy to hit the soldering iron first. The moment the mountain-quaking energy took effect, he used the mountain-quaking energy to penetrate the soldering iron, working from the inside and the outside. In just one day, Chu Mu succeeded. The moment he succeeded, he suddenly had a feeling that perhaps he could start forging royal-grade swords. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 5:13. The four walls of the huge room were made of thick and heavy steel, and there were all kinds of seals. These seals could strengthen the steel walls several times to prevent accidents from happening. Inside the huge furnace, there was a terrifying flame burning, as if there was an ancient demon hiding inside. The light emitted by the flame lit up the whole room. The light was cyan, which was very strange. This flame was not an ordinary flame, but a special flame with a temperature that reached a certain limit. It was called the cyan steel flame. The cyan steel flame was enough to melt ordinary metals in an instant. Even the metal of a top-grade sword would be melted in a short period of time. Chu Mu stood beside the furnace, and used an iron clamp to place a soldering iron into the cyan steel flame. This soldering iron was a synthetic metal used to forge king-grade sword. Before forging the Desolate Sky sword, Chu Mu wanted to forge other king-grade swords as practice. However, the flame in his small shop was not enough to melt the synthetic metal used to forge king-grade sword. This was the biggest place to buy and sell swords in the Tianfeng province, one of the Sword Treasure House's sword forges. Only a place like the Sword Treasure House could have a sword forges that could forge king-grade swords. This was because the cyan steel flame was more powerful than ordinary flames. Renting a sword forges like this for a day would cost 10,000 upper-grade spirit stones, which was very expensive. Moreover, the spirit stones needed to support the cyan steel flame were also provided by him. As expected of the cyan steel flame, it did not take long for the soldering iron to turn red, and he began to forge. In the entire sword forges, there was only Chu Mu, so he did not have to worry about being spied on. Chu Mu forged to his heart's content. He alternated between using the mountain-shaking energy and the mountain-piercing energy, becoming more and more proficient, but the consumption was also very high. After a period of time, Chu Mu finally hammered the sword embryo into shape. Next, he needed to quench the water. This water was not ordinary water, but a type of cold spring water. The quenching of the water was even better. This is the first king-grade sword that I have forged. Chu Mu pulled out the sword from the cold spring water and looked at it carefully. The entire sword was cyan in color, as if there was a stream of light flowing on the sword. This was an ordinary sword. In terms of quality, it could only be considered an ordinary king-grade sword. Of course, this was only Chu Mu's practice. It was a preparation before he forged the Desolation sword. Take a rest and recover your strength. Let's begin forging the Desolate Sky sword. An hour later, Chu Mu took out many upper-grade spirit stones for the green steel fire to burn. Then, he took out pieces of metal, all of which were needed to forge the Desolate Sky sword. The method of forging the Tianhuang sword was very clear in the Tianhuang sword scripture. Every step was very detailed. Chu Mu had already understood it very well and had even simulated it in his mental world. All the metals needed to forge the desolate sword were here. There was only one chance, and failure was not an option. Chu Mu was extremely confident. Taking a deep breath, he began to throw the metal into the azure steel fire. The first step was to extract the essence of the metal and fuse the various essences to form a composite metal. The second step was to temper the composite metal and forge it into a sword embryo. The third step was to temper the sword embryo into a real sword. There were no special requirements for the appearance of the Tianhuang sword. It could be forged according to one's preferences. This was because the Tianhuang sword was born to carry the Tianhuang sword essence. The Tianhuang sword essence was different from ordinary sword essence. Under normal circumstances, it was difficult for a king-grade sword to unleash the true power of the Tianhuang sword essence. These metals were not ordinary metals. It was not easy to melt them with the temperature of the green steel fire. After spending a full 4 hours, Chu Mu finally melted the dozen pieces of metal and extracted the essence within. He followed the order and method recorded in the heavenly desolate sword scripture and mixed them together. Finally, he poured the mixed metal essence liquid into the mold to form the shape of a sword embryo. When the sword embryo was solidified, it was removed and baked in the green steel fire. The sword embryo became red inside and out. He placed it on the iron felt and began to hammer it. This kind of hammering required sufficient skill. It could not be done by simply hammering. This was also why to become a master swordsmith or grandmaster swordsmith, one had to study the great swordsmith technique meticulously and spend time practicing hard. The mountain-quaking energy instantly shook and tempered the sword embryo. In an instant, the mountain-piercing energy entered the sword embryo and tempered the sword embryo. In this way, the impurities in the sword embryo were constantly removed. First, he hammered the sword embryo dozens of times. The appearance of the sword embryo changed little by little. Then, Chu Mu changed to a smaller black iron hammer. The hammering strength was less than half of the previous one. Now, the appearance of the king-grade sword was basically complete. The next step was the sculpting process. The small black iron hammer quickly and briefly hammered the sword body, gradually changing the appearance of the sword body in Chu Mu's mind. This was a very delicate job. It was not something that could be done casually. It had to be constantly infused with the technique of the heaven-quaking fusion sword forging technique. Time slowly passed. Chu Mu's muscles constantly bulged and contracted as he waved the black iron hammer. His sweat glistened under the light of the green steel fire, as if it was smeared with a layer of oil. After 6 hours, the sword under Chu Mu's black iron hammer was almost complete. He hammered it again and again. When it was almost cold, he placed it in the green steel fire and roasted it until it turned red. He continued hammering it repeatedly. After another 2 hours, Chu Mu suddenly exerted force. He vigorously hammered the sword body with the small black iron hammer. It produced an ear-piercing sound that turned into a sound wave. It was as clear as the ripples in the water. Throwing down the black iron hammer, Chu Mu plunged the sword into the cold spring to quench it. A sizzling sound rang out and a large amount of white smoke rose in spirals, filling the surroundings. After a quarter of an hour, the sword cooled down. Chu Mu pulled it out of the cold spring water. His right hand held the sword hilt in front of him as he carefully examined it. The sword's appearance was exactly the same as the eight-faced Han's sword on Earth. The eight-faced Han's sword looked majestic and had an invisible domineering aura. It was upright and plain-spoken. It was Chu Mu's favorite sword. On Earth, Chu Mu used an eight-faced Han's sword that was specially made for him by a famous blacksmith. That sword had accompanied him for many years, until he died and transmigrated. In the past, Chu Mu did not know how to forge a sword. In addition, he did not have the time to forge a sword, so he would use whatever sword he got. Today, he could forge a sword for himself, and it was a sword that was most suitable for him. Naturally, he would forge a sword that he liked. The length of the sword was 110 centimeters. The hilt was 25 centimeters long, the crossguard was 8 centimeters long, and the blade was 77 centimeters long. The width of the crossguard was 3.2 centimeters, the tip was 2 centimeters, and the width was 0.8 centimeters. As for the weight, because the density of the dozen or so metals was very high, far higher than that of ordinary steel, and after extracting the essence and fusing it, and constantly tempering it, the density was even higher, and the weight was more than 50 kilograms. Of course, the weight of 50 kilograms was nothing to Chu Mu's current physical strength. It was as easy as a strong adult holding a tree branch. There were 4 sides on each side of the sword, and they were faintly golden in color. There were countless patterns on the sword that looked like feathers and clouds. It was like an ancient world. There was a faint ancient aura that was emitted from the sword. It was the fluctuation of the desolate heaven chi. The blade on the left and right sides of the sword was not golden, but a very obvious blood-red color. It was extremely thin, and constantly flashed with an astonishing sharpness, incomparably fierce. As for the tip of the sword, there was also an extremely thin scarlet light. It seemed to be restrained, but also seemed to be about to burst out. Those who had not reached the origin realm would not dare to look directly at this sword, because the sharpness was too strong. It was so strong that their vision could not bear it. 8-sided desolate heaven sword. With a light wave, the incomparably sharp blade seemed to cut through the void, leaving behind a trail of blood that was hard to see with the naked eye. It disappeared in the blink of an eye. Chu Mu casually stabbed with the sword, as if it had pierced through the void in front of him. Only then did an incomparably fierce sound ring out. With ease, Chu Mu could now stab with a sword that surpassed the speed of sound. Good sword. The voice of the Azura sword of Gojoseon was heard. His soul did not appear. It is a good sword. Chu Mu nodded. His left index and middle fingers slowly stroked the body of the 8-sided desolate heaven sword. It is also a top royal grade sword, extremely powerful. Your great sword forging art has already embarked on its own path. The Azura sword of Gojoseon pondered for a moment, then said, "But right now, you are only in the beginning stages of becoming a master. The path to becoming a great master is still very far away." "I do not wish to become a great master," Chu Mu said. A great sword forging master could forge royal grade swords, while a great sword forging master could forge royal grade swords, which were powerful swords suitable for sword saints. There was a huge difference between royal grade swords and royal grade swords. This was Chu Mu's second time forging a royal grade sword. Because of the materials and his own great sword forging art, he was able to forge a top royal grade sword, which was enough for him at the moment. At the very least, when he became a sword saint or the sword of Gojoseon, this 8-sided desolate heaven sword would be enough for him to use for a long time. As for becoming a sword saint in the future, he would consider a royal grade sword. With your current progress, you will be able to break through to the origin realm within half a year. At that time, your strength will increase by leaps and bounds. The Azura sword of Gojoseon said. Although he rarely spoke in the past year, he was very clear about Chu Mu's progress. This speed was much faster than when he passed through the 9th transformation realm. The Azura sword of Gojoseon really wanted to take Chu Mu as his last disciple and teach him the Azura sword way. Unfortunately, Chu Mu had his own ideals and goals. From his words, it was obvious that he did not want to take him as his master. The Azura sword of Gojoseon could only take a step back. However, Xiao Qianfeng's talent was indeed not bad. It was completely possible for him to become his disciple. The 8-sided desolate heaven sword is finished. Next, I will forge a scabbard. As he spoke, Chu Mu took out some metal and melted it again. The forging of a scabbard was not that difficult. After 4 hours, Chu Mu finished forging a suitable scabbard. He stored it in his space bracelet and left the sword forging room. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation.